Every year, like clockwork, the person I love the most chooses a life without me and somehow expects me to still be there when he comes back. I'm 22, he's 21. His name is Elias. Mine is Clara. We've been together since I was 18 and he was 17, which in hindsight already set the tone for everything that followed. He was always a little behind emotionally, and I was always the one trying to understand, to wait, to be patient. We met in university in Rotterdam. Both of us knew, both of us trying to figure out who we were. He was quiet, observant, the kind of person who listens more than he talks. I thought that meant depth. The first year we were together felt like something out of a film. Late night walks by the river, cheap wine on the balcony, falling asleep mid-conversation. He used to look at me like I was something rare, something he was afraid to lose. I think that's why I ignored the first time he said it, think I need a break. It was about 11 months in. We'd had a small argument, nothing serious, just one of those stupid things about time and priorities. I thought we'd make up like always. Instead, he went quiet for 2 days and then sat me down and said he didn't know what he wanted anymore. I remember laughing at first because I genuinely thought he was joking. Who doesn't know what they want after almost a year with someone? But he didn't laugh. He just kept saying it over and over, like a script he'd memorized. I just need space to think. That was the first break. I cried for days. I didn't eat properly, didn't sleep properly. I replayed everything in my head, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. But after about 3 weeks, he came back, just like that. Said he missed me. Said he realized I was important to him. Said he'd been confused. And I took him back. I didn't even hesitate. I told myself it was normal. We were young. People get overwhelmed. Relationships aren't always linear. That's what everyone says, right? The second year was different. Not bad, but not as effortless as the first. There was this quiet understanding between us now that things could end at any moment, that I wasn't something stable in his life. I tried to ignore it. I tried to be easy, to not push too hard, to not ask too many questions. Then, almost exactly a year after the first break, it happened again. Same words. I don't know what I want. This time, it didn't even come after a fight. Things had been good, or at least, I thought they had. We'd gone on a weekend trip to Bruges just a month before. He'd held my hand, kissed my forehead, talked about future plans in that vague, non-committal way he always did. And then suddenly, he needed space again. I remember asking him, is it me? Is there someone else? And he looked genuinely offended. No. It's not about you, it's me, that phrase. I hate that phrase now. Because if it's always him, why am I the one left picking up the pieces every time? The second break lasted longer. About 6 weeks. Long enough for me to start adjusting to life without him. I went out more. Spent time with friends I'd neglected. Even went on a couple of dates, though I never told him that part. Not because I felt guilty, but because I knew it would complicate things when he came back. And of course, he did come back. He always comes back. This time he cried. Actually cried. Said he was scared of losing me. Said the thought of me moving on made him panic. Said he needed to grow up. I believed him again. I always believe him. By the third year, I started noticing the pattern before it even fully happened. Around the same time, late spring, early summer, he would start getting distant. Replies would take longer. Plans would become less frequent. He'd seem distracted, like he was already halfway out the door. And I would feel it coming, like a storm you can't stop. I tried to talk to him about it before it escalated. Are you thinking about taking another break? He looked surprised, almost guilty. I don't know. Maybe. I've just been feeling off. That was enough, apparently. And just like that, the third break happened. Almost to the day, 1 year after the last one. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't random. This wasn't him figuring things out. This was a cycle, a routine. Something he had gotten used to doing, and something I had unknowingly agreed to participate in. But even then, I didn't leave, because during the breaks he would still text me sometimes, little things. A meme. A song. Hope you're doing okay? Just enough to keep the connection alive. Just enough to make sure I didn't fully move on. And I let him. God, I hate admitting that, but I let him. I kept answering. I kept being there, emotionally available, even when he had technically left. It was like being put on pause instead of actually being broken up with. And when he came back for the third time, it felt different. Not better. Just more familiar. Like we both knew the script by now. He apologized. I forgave him. We slipped back into our routines. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't as open anymore. I didn't trust the stability of it. Every happy moment came with this quiet voice in the back of my head saying, enjoy it while it lasts. Now we're in our 4th year. And you can probably guess what just happened. A few days ago, he sat me down again, same tone, same hesitation. I think I need another break. I didn't cry this time. I just looked at him and asked, do you realize you do this every year? He went quiet, really quiet, like he'd never actually thought about it that way. I'm not doing it on purpose, he said eventually. And I believe that part. I don't think he's intentionally trying to hurt me. I think he genuinely doesn't know what he wants. But at some point, does that even matter? Impact is impact. I asked him what he thinks will be different this time. He didn't have an answer. That was the moment something in me finally cracked, not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in a quiet, almost calm realization. I have spent 4 years being someone's maybe. 4 years being the person he comes back to when he decides he does want me, after temporarily deciding he doesn't. 4 years of putting my life on hold every time he gets confused. And the worst part, I don't even know who I am without this cycle anymore. My entire adult life has been structured around his uncertainty. So now I'm here, technically on another break. He says he needs time again. Says he doesn't want to lose me. Says he just needs to figure things out. But for the first time, I'm not sure I'll be here when he comes back. Because I'm starting to realize something I should have realized a long time ago. Someone who only chooses you when it's convenient for them isn't really choosing you at all. And I don't know if I can keep being an option in someone else's life while they are the center of mine. Update. I didn't expect things to unfold as quickly as they did after I wrote all of that. I thought I'd sit in this quiet, suspended state for weeks again, checking my phone too often, overanalyzing every message, waiting for him to circle back like he always does. But something shifted in me this time, and I think he noticed it almost immediately. The first few days of the break felt eerily calm. No dramatic crying, no desperate texts, no replaying conversations at 3 a.m. I went to class, met my friend Elise for coffee, even cleaned my apartment properly for the first time in months. It was like my body hadn't caught up yet to what was happening. Or maybe it had just decided it was done reacting the same way. Elias, on the other hand, didn't stick to his usual pattern. Normally, during these breaks, he would go quiet for a while, like he needed to create distance to justify what he was doing. But this time, he texted me the very next day. Did you get home safe? I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I realized I didn't feel that automatic pull to respond immediately anymore. I just wrote, yes, that was it. No follow-up, no warmth, no opening for a longer conversation. He replied with, good, and then nothing. The next day, he sent me a photo of something random, some street cat he'd seen near his apartment. Normally, I would have responded with something playful, maybe turned it into a conversation. This time, I just reacted with a heart and put my phone down. By day 3, he called me. That had never happened before during one of our breaks. I let it ring the first time. My heart was racing in a way I hadn't felt in a while, but it wasn't the same kind of panic. It was more like anticipation mixed with something steadier, something more grounded. He called again about an hour later. I picked up. Hey, he said, and his voice sounded off. Not distant like usual, but uncertain. Hey. There was a pause. A long one. I feel like you're mad at me, he said, and that caught me off guard because anger wasn't what I was feeling. Not exactly. I'm not mad, I said honestly. I'm just tired. Another pause. I could almost hear him trying to process that. Tired of what? I laughed a little, but there was no humor in it. Elias, you break up with me every year. He didn't correct me this time. He didn't say it wasn't a breakup. He didn't try to soften it. I told you I'm not doing it on purpose. I know, I said. But that doesn't make it hurt less. He went quiet again, and then he said something he had never said before. I think you're pulling away. That was the moment everything flipped. Because for the first time in 4 years, he was the one noticing distance. He was the one feeling unsure. I think I am, I admitted. I expected him to get defensive or to retreat like he usually does when things get uncomfortable. Instead, his voice got softer. I don't like that. I didn't respond right away. I was sitting on my bed looking out the window, realizing how many times I had felt that exact same thing and how he had still chosen to leave anyway. I didn't like it either, I said finally. That conversation didn't resolve anything. If anything, it just made everything more real. But it changed the dynamic in a way I didn't fully understand until later. Over the next week, he kept reaching out. Not constantly, not in an overwhelming way, but consistently enough that it felt different from all the other breaks. He would ask how my day was, tell me small things about his, send me songs again like he used to when we first met, and I didn't fully engage. I wasn't ignoring him, but I wasn't feeding into it either. I answered, but briefly. I didn't ask many questions back. I didn't open emotional doors for him to walk through. At some point, Elise said something to me that stuck. He's used to you waiting. What happens if you stop? I didn't have an answer for that, but I think I was already finding out. About 10 days into the break, he asked if we could meet. That had never happened this early before. Normally, he would take weeks, sometimes over a month, before even suggesting seeing each other again. But this time, it was barely over a week. I hesitated before agreeing. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because I knew this meeting wouldn't be like the others. There wasn't that same desperate hope in me anymore. We met at the same place we always did, a small park near the canal where we had spent so many evenings together. It was almost ironic how familiar everything felt, like stepping into a memory that hadn't fully faded. He looked nervous when he saw me. Elias is not a nervous person. He's usually calm, almost detached, but this time he kept fidgeting, running his hand through his hair, avoiding eye contact for the first few minutes. You look different, he said. I feel different, I replied. We sat on the bench, a bit of distance between us. I've been thinking a lot, he started. I didn't interrupt. I just let him talk. I don't think I want to lose you. There it was. The same line, the same sentiment, but it landed differently this time. Then why do you keep letting me go? I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I don't know, he admitted. I just something in me panics. Like I'm not ready, or I'm missing something, or I need to figure myself out before I can fully commit. I nodded slowly. And do you ever actually figure it out during these breaks? He looked down. No. That honesty hurt more than any excuse he could have given. So what are we doing then? I asked quietly, because from my side, it just feels like you're pressing pause on me every time things get too real. He didn't argue with that either. I think I've been taking you for granted, he said. I almost smiled at that, but not in a happy way. I think you have too. We sat in silence for a while after that. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but heavy with everything that's been said and everything that hasn't. I want to try again, he said eventually, but properly this time, no breaks. I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see if anything had actually changed or if this was just another version of the same cycle. And what happens next year? I asked. He frowned. What do you mean? You've said similar things before. Maybe not in the exact same words, but the outcome has always been the same. So what's different now? I'm aware of it now, he said. You pointed it out. I can work on it. I wanted to believe that so badly. A part of me still does. But another part, the part that has been quietly growing stronger over the past few weeks, wasn't convinced. Awareness doesn't automatically mean change, I said. He looked hurt, but he didn't deny it. So what are you saying? He asked. I took a deep breath. I'm saying I don't know if I can go back to how things were. That was the first time I had ever said something like that to him. In the past, I would have already forgiven him, already moved back into his life without hesitation. But now, there was this space between us that I wasn't rushing to close. I don't want to lose you, he said again, more quietly this time. I know, I replied. But I think I might lose myself if I keep doing this. That sentence felt like the most honest thing I had said in years. He didn't have a response to that. We didn't make a decision that day. We didn't get back together, but we didn't fully close the door either. We just left things uncertain, which is probably the most fitting way for our story to exist. But the difference now is that the uncertainty isn't only coming from him. For the first time, I'm the one who doesn't know what I want. And strangely, that feels like the first step toward finally choosing myself. Final update. I waited longer than I expected to write this, mostly because I didn't want to rush into some clean, dramatic ending that didn't actually reflect what happened. Real endings aren't like that. They're slower, quieter, and a lot more uncomfortable. After that conversation in the park, things stayed in that strange in-between state for a while. We didn't get back together, but we also didn't completely cut contact. It wasn't intentional, it just sort of continued. A message here, a conversation there, not constant, not intense, but enough to keep the thread between us from snapping. At first, I told myself it was fine because I wasn't emotionally drowning anymore. I wasn't waiting by my phone. I wasn't rearranging my life around him. I felt more stable, more in control. I thought that meant I had finally figured out how to handle this situation in a healthier way. But what I didn't realize right away was that I was still holding the door open. Not wide open like before. Not in that desperate, all-consuming way, but open enough that he could still walk back in whenever he wanted. And he tried. About 3 weeks after we met in the park, he asked to see me again. This time, his message was more direct. Can we talk? Properly. I knew what that meant. We met at his apartment. I hadn't been there since before the break, and walking in felt surreal. Everything was exactly the same books on his desk, the same mug he always used, even the jacket I used to wear still hanging by the door. It was like stepping into a version of my life that had been paused. He didn't waste time this time. I don't want this to be another cycle, he said. I've been thinking a lot, and I know I've messed this up repeatedly. But I want to fix it. I listened, but I didn't feel that automatic relief I used to feel when he said things like that. Instead, I felt cautious. How? I asked. I'll commit, he said quickly. No more breaks. If something feels wrong, I'll talk about it instead of running. It sounded right. It sounded like exactly what I had wanted to hear for years. But something in me stayed still. And what changed? I asked. Because you've been unsure every single year? What's actually different now? Besides the fact that I'm not reacting the same way anymore. He hesitated, and for a second I thought he wouldn't have an answer again. You're different, he said finally. You're not waiting for me the same way. And it scared me. That honesty hit harder than anything else he had said. So you're ready now because you think you might lose me, I asked. It's not just that, he said, but he didn't sound entirely convincing. I nodded slowly, letting that settle. Because here's the thing I didn't understand before, but I do now. Being chosen out of fear of loss is not the same as being chosen out of certainty. For years, I had been the constant in his life, the person he could step away from and come back to knowing I would still be there. There was no real risk for him, no urgency, no reason to actually confront whatever was making him run. Now, for the first time, that safety net wasn't guaranteed anymore, and suddenly he was ready. I sat there looking at him, and I realized I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad in the way I used to be. I just felt clear. I don't think I can do this again, I said. He went very still. What do you mean? I mean, I believe that you don't want to lose me. I believe that you're scared. But I don't believe that's enough to build something stable on. His expression changed, like the reality of what I was saying was finally catching up. So that's it, he asked. You're just giving up. I shook my head. No, I think I'm finally not giving up on myself. That silence after was different from all the others we'd had over the years. There was no tension building toward reconciliation, no unspoken expectation that I would soften if we just waited long enough. It just felt final. I can change, he said quietly, and I believe he can. I really do. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't think he ever meant to hurt me the way he did. But I also understand something now that I didn't before. Someone's potential doesn't erase the pattern they've already shown you. I hope you do, I said. But I can't stay and find out. His eyes filled up a little, which I had only seen a couple of times before. I thought you were the one person who would always be there, he said. That almost broke me. Because for the longest time, I thought so too. I said. For 4 years I was. And that was the truth. I had been there consistently, patiently, even when it cost me parts of myself. But being the one who always stays isn't something to be proud of when it comes at that kind of expense. We didn't argue. There was no dramatic ending, no slammed doors, no raised voices. Just two people sitting in a room, finally acknowledging something that had been obvious for a long time. I left shortly after that. He didn't try to stop me. The first few days after were strange. Not painful in the way I expected, but empty, like I had removed something so central from my life that everything else felt slightly out of place. I kept catching myself thinking I should tell Elias this, or I wonder what he would say about that, and then remembering that I didn't have to and that he wouldn't be there to respond anyway. But alongside that emptiness, there was something else. Relief. A quiet, steady kind of relief that didn't come from him choosing me, but from me choosing myself. It's been about 2 months now. We haven't spoken since that day. He texted once, about a week after, just saying, I hope you're okay. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I knew any response would just reopen something I had finally managed to close. I don't know what he's doing now. I don't check his social media anymore. I don't ask mutual friends about him. And for the first time in 4 years, my life doesn't feel like it's on pause. I've started making plans without that voice in the back of my head wondering if he'll still be around when they happen. I've reconnected with people I drifted away from. I've even started seeing someone new, not seriously, not with expectations, just openly. And the biggest difference, I don't feel like I'm waiting. Not for a text, not for a decision, not for someone to figure out if I'm worth choosing. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that love isn't supposed to feel like a yearly test you have to keep passing just to stay in someone's life. It's supposed to feel like something steady, something chosen every day without hesitation. And maybe Elias will get there one day. Maybe he'll figure himself out and be able to give that to someone else. But it's not going to be me anymore, because I finally understand that being someone's maybe for years is just another way of saying you were never really their yes. Stories number 2. I told my roommate I don't care about her baby, and now everything has completely blown up. I honestly don't even know where to start, and I'm writing this because I need to get it out somewhere before I lose my mind. I guess I'll just start from the beginning. I'm 27, living in a rented flat in a mid-sized city in Europe. I moved here about 2 years ago for work, and at first I lived alone. It was great, quiet, predictable, everything was mine. But rent went up and I couldn't justify paying that much anymore, so I decided to get a roommate. That's how I ended up living with Elena. Elena is 25, and when she first moved in, she seemed perfect. Friendly but not intrusive, clean, paid rent on time, and we actually got along really well. We'd watch movies together sometimes, cook dinner, have wine nights, nothing crazy, just normal roommate stuff. I genuinely thought I got lucky. About 6 months into living together, she sat me down and told me she was pregnant. I remember just staring at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. She told me it wasn't planned, that the father wasn't really in the picture, and that she decided to keep the baby. I didn't know what to say, so I just said something like, "Okay, are you okay?" She said yes, she'd make it work, and here's the thing. I didn't judge her for it. It's her life. But I did immediately feel this sinking feeling in my stomach because I knew what it meant for me. I asked her what her plan was, and she said she'd stay in the flat, at least for the first year. She said babies mostly sleep anyway, and she'd try not to disturb me. I didn't argue. I probably should have, but I didn't. I think part of me felt like I'd look like an asshole if I pushed back on a pregnant woman who was already clearly stressed. So I just went along with it. That was my first mistake. Fast forward to when the baby was born, his name is Lucas. At first, I tried really hard to be understanding. I knew babies cry. I knew sleep would be disrupted. I bought earplugs. I even congratulated her, brought her some food, tried to be supportive in a basic human way. But nothing prepared me for what it would actually be like. Lucas cried. Constantly. Not just normal crying, screaming. At all hours. 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m. Sometimes it felt like he never stopped. The walls in our flat are thin, like paper thin. I could hear everything. At first I told myself it's just temporary. Babies grow out of this. But weeks turned into months. I stopped sleeping properly. I'd go to work exhausted, make mistakes, get called out by my boss. I started dreading going home because I knew I wouldn't get any rest. And then things started crossing lines. Elena began asking for help. At first it was small things. Can you hold him for a minute while I shower? Or can you watch him while I run downstairs? I said yes sometimes, no other times. I tried to keep boundaries. But over time, the requests became expectations. She'd knock on my door without asking if I was busy. Sometimes she'd just open it slightly and say, "Can you take him? I haven't slept." And I get it. She was struggling. I'm not heartless. But I didn't sign up to be a co-parent. I started saying no more often. That's when her attitude changed. She became passive-aggressive. Little comments like, "Must be nice to sleep whenever you want," or "Some people have no idea what real responsibility is." I ignored it at first, but it kept building. Then one night, everything exploded. I had an important presentation the next morning. I'd been preparing for weeks. I told Elena earlier that day very clearly, "I need to sleep tonight. Please, if there's anything you can do to keep things quiet, I'd really appreciate it." She nodded, said she understood. At around 1 a.m., Lucas started crying. Loud, like ear-piercing screaming. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15, it didn't stop. I could hear Elena talking to him, but it wasn't calming him down at all. It just kept escalating. I tried to put a pillow over my head. Earplugs. Nothing worked. After about 30 minutes, I snapped. I got out of bed, went to her room, and knocked. No answer. I knocked harder. She opened the door, looking exhausted, holding Lucas, who was still screaming. I said, probably louder than I should have, "Can you do something about this? I have work in the morning." She just stared at me and said, "What do you want me to do? He's a baby." And I don't know why, but something in me just broke at that moment. I said, "I don't care. He's not my problem." She looked like I'd slapped her. I kept going. I didn't sign up for this. "I told you I need sleep. I can't live like this anymore." And then the line that apparently changed everything. "I don't give a fuck about your baby, Elena. I just want some peace in my own home." The second I said it, I knew it sounded harsh, but at the same time it was the truth, raw, ugly truth, but still truth. She just went completely silent. Then she said very quietly, "Get out of my room." So I did. The next morning, she didn't talk to me, didn't even look at me. I went to work, completely exhausted, and messed up my presentation anyway. When I came back home, things were different, she had told people. I don't even know who exactly, some friends, maybe family, but suddenly I was getting messages from mutual acquaintances saying things like, "What's wrong with you? And how could you say that to a new mother?" Even one of our neighbors gave me a dirty look in the hallway. Now the flat feels like a war zone. She avoids me completely, but also makes things deliberately uncomfortable, leaving baby stuff in shared spaces, playing lullabies out loud, slamming doors. And I'm stuck here because the lease still has months left. Part of me feels bad. I know what I said was harsh. I know she's struggling, probably more than I can even understand. But another part of me is just angry, because no one seems to care that I've been living in a situation I never agreed to. That my sleep, my job, my mental health have all taken a hit because of a decision I didn't make. I didn't insult her as a person. I didn't say anything about her being a bad mother. I just said I don't care about the baby, because I don't. Not in the way she wants me to. I feel like I'm being painted as some kind of monster for not wanting to be dragged into someone else's life choice. Now I don't know what to do. Living here is unbearable, but leaving isn't simple. Talking to her feels impossible after what I said. And even if I apologize, I don't think it will actually fix anything. I just wanted a quiet place to live. Update. I didn't think things could get more tense after that night, but I was wrong. It somehow managed to get worse in ways I didn't even anticipate. For the first few days after everything blew up, Elena and I basically existed like strangers forced into the same space. No eye contact, no communication, nothing except the unavoidable background noise of Lucas crying and the sound of her moving around the flat. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that makes you constantly aware that something is wrong. I started spending less time at home. I'd stay late at work, sit in cafes for hours, even go on long walks at night just to delay going back. It wasn't sustainable, but it felt better than walking into that atmosphere. Then about a week later, I came home earlier than usual because I honestly just felt drained. I thought maybe if I kept my head down, stayed in my room, things would just coexist. When I opened the door, there were two people sitting in the living room with Alina. I recognized one of them from photos, her older sister, Sophia. The other was a guy I hadn't seen before, probably a friend or maybe a cousin. They both stopped talking the second I walked in. The way they looked at me, I don't even know how to describe it properly. It wasn't just disapproval. It was like I was something disgusting they just discovered. I said a quiet hi and tried to move past them toward my room, but Sophia stood up. She said my name in this very controlled tone and asked if we could talk. I should have just said no and walked away, but I didn't. I think part of me felt like maybe this was a chance to clear things up. Big mistake. She started by saying that Alina had told her everything. Not just what I said, but how I've been treating her for months. That part caught me off guard. I asked what she meant, and apparently Elena had been telling people that I was cold, unhelpful, and resentful of a baby existing. Which, I guess from her perspective, is true, but the way it was framed made me sound like some kind of heartless psychopath. I tried to explain. I said I never agreed to live with a baby, that I've been struggling with sleep, that I have a job that's being affected. I even admitted that what I said was harsh, but it came from months of frustration. Sophia just shook her head. She said something that stuck with me. You live with a vulnerable person and a newborn, and your biggest concern is your sleep schedule. I said yes, because I have to function. I didn't choose this. And then the conversation just spiraled. The guy who was there, his name is Daniel, I found out, started chiming in, saying things like, it's called basic human decency, and you're acting like a child. At that point, I felt like I was being ganged up on in my own home. I told them as calmly as I could that if Alina needed that level of support, she should be living with family, not a roommate who never signed up for this. That didn't go over well. Elena started crying, like full on crying, holding Lucas, who then also started crying because of the tension. And suddenly I was standing there in the middle of all of it, feeling like the worst person alive, but also completely cornered. Sophia told me I should consider moving out if I can't handle basic empathy. I said I would, if I could afford to break the lease without ruining myself financially. That's when I learned something new. Apparently, Elena had already been talking to the landlord. I didn't even know that was happening. After they left, I checked my email, and sure enough, there was a message from the landlord asking if we could schedule a call about ongoing issues in the flat. That's when things started to feel real in a different way. Not just emotionally uncomfortable, but like this could actually affect my housing situation. We had the call 2 days later. Alina was there, I was there, and the landlord basically said he'd received complaints about conflict and unsuitable living conditions for a child. That phrase stuck with me. Unsuitable for a child. Not unsuitable for two adults with completely different lifestyles forced in the same space, but specifically framed around the baby. Elena spoke first. She said she feels unsafe and unsupported, that the environment is hostile, and that it's not healthy for her or Lucas. Then it was my turn. I explained everything from the beginning, that I agreed to a roommate, not a family situation, that I've tried to be accommodating, but it's affecting my work and well-being, that I don't feel like I should be forced out or penalized for something I didn't choose. The landlord listened, but I could tell where this was going. He said something like, this is a difficult situation, but the presence of a newborn does change the dynamics, which basically translates to, she has more leverage than you. He suggested a mutual agreement where one of us leaves early. Guess who he was looking at when he said it? After the call, I just sat in my room for a long time, staring at nothing. I started looking at apartments that same night. Everything is expensive, way more than what I'm paying now. And most places want long-term commitments, deposits, agency fees. It adds up fast. I can technically afford it, but it would wipe out a big chunk of my savings. And that's what's been eating at me the most. I feel like I'm being pushed out of my own living situation because someone else made a life decision, completely changed the terms of our shared space. At the same time, I can't ignore the reality that living here is getting worse by the day. Elena doesn't talk to me directly anymore, but everything feels intentional, like she's making sure I feel unwelcome. And honestly, maybe she has every right to feel hurt after what I said. But I'm also still not wrong about the core issue. I didn't sign up for this. A couple nights ago, I had another moment where I almost knocked on her door to apologize. Not because I've changed how I feel, because I know the way I said it was unnecessarily brutal. I didn't do it. Because I don't think an apology would actually fix anything. It wouldn't make the baby stop crying. It wouldn't give me back sleep. It wouldn't undo the fact that we want completely incompatible things from this living situation. So now I'm stuck in this weird place where I'm both considering leaving and resenting the fact that I feel forced to. I've started packing small things, not fully committing, but preparing. Because deep down, I think I already know how this ends. I just didn't expect that trying to protect my own space and sanity would turn me into the villain in everyone else's eyes. Update. I waited longer than I probably should have to write this, mostly because everything that happened after felt less like a single event and more like a slow collapse of everything I thought was stable. I did end up leaving the flat. Not immediately, not dramatically, no big argument, no final shouting match, but in that quiet, inevitable way where you realize you've already made the decision long before you act on it. About a week after my last update, things reached a kind of breaking point, but not in the explosive way you'd expect. It was actually something small. I had come home after another long day, already exhausted, already on edge. The flat was quiet for once, which felt almost suspicious. I remember thinking maybe Lucas had finally settled into some kind of routine. I went into the kitchen, made something quick to eat, and sat down. For a few minutes, it was just normal, silent, peaceful. And then Alina came in. We hadn't spoken properly in weeks at that point. Not even a full sentence. Just avoidance. She didn't look angry this time. That's what caught me off guard. She looked tired. Not just physically, but in a way that felt deeper than that. She asked if we could talk. I said yes. We sat across from each other at the table, like two people negotiating something neither of us really wanted to say out loud. She started by saying she'd been thinking about everything that happened. That she knows things got out of control, and that she didn't expect things to turn out like this when she decided to stay in the flat after getting pregnant. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. Then she said something I wasn't expecting at all. She said, "You're not wrong for not wanting this." That honestly hit me harder than any of the accusations before. Because for weeks, I'd been made to feel like I was completely in the wrong. Like there was no room for my side at all. But then she followed it with, "But the way you said it, that's what I can't forget." And yeah, fair. I told her I knew. That I regretted how I said it, even if I still felt the same way underneath. I actually apologized. Properly this time. Not defensive, not trying to justify it in the moment. Just an apology. She accepted it, but not in a way that fixed anything. More like acknowledging it without it changing the reality between us. Then we got to the part we'd both been avoiding. She told me she'd been looking into moving back closer to her family, but it wasn't something she could arrange immediately. She needed time, support, logistics, all things that aren't simple with a newborn. And I told her I'd been looking at other places. We both kind of sat there in silence after that because it was obvious what that meant. This wasn't going to work. Not now, maybe not ever. There wasn't really a solution where both of us stayed and things magically improved. So we made a decision. I would move out. Not because I was forced legally, not because the landlord officially kicked me out, but because practically speaking, I was the one with more flexibility. No baby, no dependency, more ability to relocate quickly. We agreed on a timeline of about 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks were strange. The tension was still there, but it changed shape. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was more like a quiet understanding that we were both just trying to get through the remaining time. We even had a few normal conversations again. Not like before, not friendly exactly, but human. There was one night that stuck with me. I couldn't sleep, ironically not because of Lucas, but just because my mind wouldn't shut off. I went into the kitchen around 3 a.m., and Alina was already there, sitting with him in her arms. He wasn't crying, just awake, making those soft baby noises. She looked at me and said, "He's actually calm for once." I didn't really know what to say, so I just stood there for a moment. Then she asked if I wanted to hold him. For a second, I almost said no out of instinct, out of everything that had happened. But I didn't. I said okay. She handed him to me, and it was weird. Not bad, just unfamiliar. He was small, obviously, but heavier than I expected. Warm. He didn't cry, just looked around in that unfocused way babies do. And I remember thinking, very clearly, that none of this was his fault. Not the situation, not the tension, not what I said. That didn't suddenly make me feel attached or change my life perspective or anything dramatic like that. But it did take away some of the edge I'd been holding on to. I handed him back after a minute or two, and that was it. No big emotional moment, no reconciliation scene. Just a quiet moment in the middle of everything. I moved out at the end of the 3 weeks. The new place is smaller, more expensive, and honestly not as nice. But it's quiet. That's the first thing I noticed the first night I slept there, just how quiet it was. No crying, no tension, no feeling like I was constantly on edge. I slept for almost 10 hours straight. Financially, it's tighter now. I had to dip into my savings more than I wanted, and I'll probably feel that for a while. But mentally, it's better. Elena and I didn't keep in touch. There was no dramatic goodbye, just a simple take care when I left with my last box. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she did eventually move closer to her family a couple of months later. As for everything else, how people saw me, the messages, the judgment, that faded over time. People moved on. They always do. I'm sure some of them still think I'm an asshole. And maybe in that moment I was, but I also think people like to simplify situations like this into clear roles. the struggling mother and the insensitive roommate. The reality was messier than that. It was two people with completely incompatible lives trying to share a space that no longer made sense for either of them. If there's anything I've taken from all of this, it's that some situations don't have a clean right or wrong, just different kinds of wrong for different people. I still stand by the fact that I didn't sign up for that life. But I also understand now that how you say something can matter just as much as what you're saying. And sometimes, even if you're right about the situation, you can still handle it badly enough to become the bad guy in someone else's story. I guess I just had to learn that the hard way. Stories number 3. I refuse to keep using the nickname my girlfriend gave me after I found out where it came from. I didn't think something as small as a nickname could mess with my head this much. But here I am, barely sleeping and replaying everything over and over. I'm 27, living in Lyon, and I've been with my girlfriend Camille for a little over a year. Things were honestly really good. She's funny in a quiet way, the kind of person who notices small things and remembers them. Like how I always take my coffee black in the morning but add sugar in the afternoon, or how I hate crowded trains but won't complain about it. A couple months into dating, she started calling me Loop. At first, I thought it was random. It means wolf, which felt kind of cool in a soft, affectionate way. I asked her about it once, and she just smiled and said it suits you. I didn't push it. It became our thing. She'd text me Bon knew it, Mon Loop, or whisper it when we were half asleep. I got used to it. I liked it even. It felt personal. Fast forward to about 3 weeks ago. Camille had a small birthday gathering at her apartment. Nothing big, just a few close friends. I'd met most of them before except one guy, Thomas. He showed up late, already a bit drunk, loud in that way where you can tell he thinks he's charming. At one point, Camille went to the kitchen to grab more drinks, and Thomas sat down next to me. He looked at me for a second, then smirked. So, he said you're the new Loop? I laughed a little, thinking he was just referencing the nickname. Yeah, I guess. He stared at me like I was missing something. She didn't tell you? That's the moment I felt it shift. That small, weird drop in your stomach when something doesn't line up. Tell me what. He hesitated, then shrugged. Yeah. Not my business. I told him if he was going to say something, he should just say it. He leaned back, took a sip of his drink, and said she used to call her ex that. Same nickname. Same tone and everything. It sounds stupid writing it out, but in that moment it felt like the air got pulled out of the room. I tried to play it off. Okay, it's just a nickname. But he didn't stop. Yeah, but it was kind of a whole thing with them. Inside joke, pet name, you know. I didn't say anything after that. I just nodded like it didn't matter. Camille came back, handed me a drink, kissed my cheek, and said, here you go, Mon Loop. And suddenly it didn't feel the same. Not even close. I spent the rest of the night distracted. Watching her, watching how she said it, how natural it was. Like muscle memory. When we got back to my place later, I asked her about it. At first, she looked confused. Then I mentioned Thomas. That's when her expression changed. It wasn't guilt exactly. More like annoyance. Why would he bring that up? She said. I told her that wasn't the point and asked if it was true. She sighed and said, yes, I used to call my ex that. But it doesn't mean anything now. I asked her why she would use the same nickname with me. She shrugged and said, because I like it. And it suits you too. That answer didn't sit right with me. I told her it felt weird. Like I wasn't getting something that was mine, but something recycled. She rolled her eyes a little and said I was overthinking it. Do you think every word I use has to be completely new? She asked. It's just a word. But it didn't feel like just a word to me. It felt like something that was supposed to be ours. I told her I didn't want her to call me that anymore. That's when things escalated. She got defensive, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing. That I was being insecure over something trivial. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the word itself, it was about what it represented. That it felt like I was stepping into a role someone else had already filled. She didn't like that. At all. She said, you're not my ex. Why are you acting like you're competing with him? I said I'm not competing. I just don't want to be compared. That turned into a whole argument about trust, insecurity, and letting the past stay in the past. She kept insisting that the nickname didn't carry any emotional weight from her previous relationship. That it was just something she liked saying. But if that was true, why not just pick something new? Why hold on to that one specifically? I asked her that, and she got quiet for a second before saying, because I don't see the problem. We kind of left it unresolved that night. She stayed over, but things felt off. Since then, she's slipped up a few times and called me Loop out of habit. Each time, I flinch a little. Not visibly, I think, but enough that she notices. Last week, she got frustrated and said, you're punishing me over a nickname. I don't think I am, but maybe I am in a way. I just can't shake the feeling that something that felt special to me wasn't actually special, that it was just reused. And now I don't know if I'm being reasonable or if I've turned this into something bigger than it needs to be. I haven't told anyone else about this because it sounds so minor when you say it out loud, but it doesn't feel minor when you're in it. So yeah, I refuse to keep being called that nickname after finding out where it came from. And now it's this weird, ongoing tension between us that I don't know how to fix. Update. It's been about 5 weeks since I first found out about the nickname, and things didn't just stay tense, they slowly got worse in ways I didn't expect. At first, Camille made an effort. I'll give her that. She stopped calling me Loop almost completely. When she caught herself about to say it, she'd pause mid-sentence and switch to my actual name, Adrian. Sometimes she'd even laugh it off like, see, I'm trying. I appreciated that, I really did. But something had already shifted in my head, and I couldn't seem to undo it. The bigger issue wasn't even the nickname anymore. It was what it represented, or maybe what I started to believe it represented. I began noticing small things I had never questioned before. Like how she'd sometimes say, oh, you do that too, in this absent way, like she was comparing without realizing it, or how certain stories about her past relationships started slipping out more often, even when they weren't really relevant. Her ex's name was Julian, by the way. I hadn't even known that before all this. It came up casually one night when she was telling a story about a trip to Marseille, and she said Julian hated the heat there, then immediately corrected herself to my ex. That stuck with me more than I expected. I started connecting dots that maybe weren't even there. One night, about 2 weeks after the argument, we were at her place watching a film. I don't even remember what it was. Something quiet, French, a lot of staring and long silences. At some point, she leaned her head on my shoulder and just said softly, you feel familiar. That should have been comforting. But all I could think was familiar like what? Like me. Or like him. I didn't say anything at the time, but it sat in my chest like something heavy. A few days later, I made the mistake of checking her social media. I'm not proud of it. I wasn't snooping through her phone or anything, just scrolling back through old posts. Photos from 3 years ago. There were pictures of her and Julian, and that's when it got worse. Because I saw it. In the captions. Mon loop, more than once. Same spelling, same tone, same stupid heart emoji. It felt like getting hit twice by the same thing. Before, it was just something someone told me. Now I could see it. Proof that it wasn't just a random word she liked. It had history, a whole relationship attached to it, and I couldn't unsee that. After that, I started pulling away without really meaning to. I'd take longer to reply to her messages. I'd make excuses not to come over. When we were together, I felt distant. Not angry, just disconnected, she noticed. Of course she did. One evening, she came over to my apartment unannounced. I opened the door, and she just looked at me for a second and said, what's going on with you? I tried to play it off at first, but she wasn't having it. She walked in, sat down, and basically refused to leave until we talked, so I told her. Not just about the nickname this time, but everything. The social media posts, the way she said certain things, how it made me feel like I was filling a space that someone else had already shaped. She listened. Actually listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't roll her eyes like before. But when I finished, she just looked tired. Adrian, she said, you're building a whole story in your head. That annoyed me immediately. I told her I wasn't making things up, that I had literally seen the posts. She nodded and said, yes, I had a life before you. I loved someone before you. That doesn't disappear just because I'm with you now? I said I understood that, but this felt different. This felt like overlap. She shook her head. It's not overlap, it's continuity. I'm still the same person I was before. I don't erase parts of myself every time I enter a new relationship. That line stuck with me, because part of me gets it. It makes sense in a rational way. But emotionally, it still didn't sit right. I asked her one simple question. Do you see anything that's just ours? Something that doesn't come from your past? She didn't answer right away. That silence said more than anything else. Eventually, she said, of course we have things that are ours. But it didn't feel convincing. I asked her to name one, and she couldn't. Not immediately. She got frustrated again, said I was putting her on the spot, that it wasn't a test. But to me it kind of was, because I needed to know if I was actually building something new with her, or just stepping into something familiar for her. That conversation didn't end well. She left that night, and we didn't talk for 3 days. When she finally texted me, it was just, I don't know how to fix this if you've already decided what everything means. I stared at that message for a long time, because I hadn't decided anything. I was still trying to figure it out. But I also realized something uncomfortable. Even if she stopped using the nickname forever, even if she reassured me 100 times, I wasn't sure I could go back to how I felt before. Something about it had cracked. We met once more after that, at a small cafe near the Rayuni. Neutral ground, I guess. She looked different. Not physically, just guarded. We talked calmly this time. No raised voices. She told me she cared about me, that she wasn't comparing me to Julian, that the nickname genuinely didn't carry the same meaning for her anymore. I told her I believed that she wasn't doing it intentionally, but I also told her how it made me feel anyway. In the end, she said something that I haven't been able to shake. I can change what I say, she told me, but I can't change how you interpret everything. And she's right. That's kind of where things are now. We're not officially broken up, but we're not okay either. We barely talk. When we do, it's polite, careful, like we're both avoiding stepping on something fragile. I still care about her. A lot. But I don't know if I can unfeel what I felt when I realized that something I thought was ours wasn't. And I don't know if that's something people just get over, or if it's one of those small things that quietly ruins everything over time. Final update. It's been a little over 2 months since my last post, and I think I've finally reached a point where I can explain what actually happened without going back and forth in my own head. Camille and I broke up. Not in a dramatic way. No shouting, no slammed doors, no one storming out into the street. It was quiet, which somehow made it heavier. The last time we met, it was at my apartment. Same place where all of this really started to unravel. I remember noticing how normal everything looked. My jacket on the chair, her scarf still hanging by the door from the last time she'd been over. It didn't feel like the setting of something ending. She sat on the couch, and for a few minutes we just talked about random things. Work, the weather, a bakery she'd tried recently. It felt almost like we were pretending to be us again. Then there was this pause, and instead of filling it, she just said, "I don't think this is working anymore." It didn't hit me like a shock. It felt more like something I had already known but hadn't said out loud yet. I nodded. That was it. No argument. We both knew why. But we still talked it through anyway, just to be sure we weren't walking away without understanding it. She told me that over the past weeks, she felt like everything she said or did was being filtered through doubt. Like I was analyzing her, trying to find traces of something that didn't belong to me. She said it made her feel like she was constantly being compared to a version of herself she couldn't go back and change. I told her she wasn't wrong, because I had been doing that, not intentionally at first, but once that idea got into my head, it spread into everything. It wasn't just the nickname anymore. It was how she laughed, how she told stories, even the way she looked at me sometimes. I kept wondering if I was seeing something real or something repeated. That's not a healthy place to be in a relationship. I can admit that now. She also said something that stuck with me more than anything else. "I think you wanted something that had no past," she said. "And I'm not that person." At first, I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that wasn't true, that I understood people have histories, that I wasn't expecting her to be some blank slate. But when I really thought about it, part of me did want that. Not logically, but emotionally, I wanted to feel like what we had was untouched, completely separate from anything that came before. And the moment I realized it wasn't, I didn't know how to adjust. I told her that. And I also told her something else I hadn't said clearly before. It wasn't just the nickname, I said. It was that I didn't feel chosen in a unique way. She looked at me for a long second after I said that. Not defensive, not angry. "Just sad. I did choose you," she said quietly. "I just didn't realize you needed it to look a certain way." That's the part that stayed with me. Because she did choose me. In all the normal, real ways that actually matter. She showed up, she cared, she paid attention, she stayed. But I got stuck on the idea that it wasn't different enough. We sat there for a while after that, both kind of absorbing it. There wasn't really a solution at that point. No compromise that would fix it without one of us forcing something that didn't feel right. So we ended it. Before she left, she took her scarf from the hook by the door. That small, ordinary movement felt like the most final thing out of everything. She paused for a second, like she wanted to say something else, but didn't. Then she just said, "Take care of yourself, Adrian." No nickname, just my name. And for some reason, that hit harder than anything else. After she left, the apartment felt different. Not emptier in a dramatic way, just quieter, like something had been gently removed. The first week after the breakup was strange. I kept expecting a message from her. Something casual like we used to do. But it didn't come. And I didn't reach out either. I spent a lot of time thinking about whether I overreacted. I asked myself that question over and over. Was it really worth losing a good relationship over a nickname? I don't think the answer is as simple as yes or no, because on the surface, it sounds ridiculous. Even now, if I explain it too quickly, it sounds like I let something small ruin something good. But I've realized it wasn't just about the word. It was about how I process things, about how much meaning I attach to small details, about how I handle the idea of someone having a past that overlaps with the present in ways I can see. Some people can separate those things easily. I couldn't. And maybe that says more about me than it does about her. I've also thought a lot about what she said, about wanting something with no past. I don't think that's actually possible. Everyone carries pieces of their previous relationships into the next one. Habits, expressions, even ways of loving. I just hadn't really confronted that before. Now I have. A couple of days ago, I was walking along the river in the evening. It was one of those quiet moments where your mind isn't racing for once. And I realized something simple. If she had made up a completely new nickname for me, something that had never existed before, I probably would have loved it without question. Not because the word itself mattered more, but because I would have felt like it came from a place that started with me. That's what I was really looking for. Something that felt like a beginning. I don't think she was wrong for how she saw things, and I don't think I was completely wrong for how I felt either. We just didn't meet in the middle on something that ended up meaning more than either of us expected. I haven't spoken to her since that day. No closure message, no let's stay friends conversation, just silence. And honestly, I think that's for the best. I still catch myself sometimes remembering the way she used to say that nickname, the way it sounded soft, almost automatic, but it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. Now it just feels like something that belonged to a version of my life that's already finished. And I guess that's the closest thing I have to closure. Stories number 4. I didn't think this would become such a big issue in my marriage, but here I am typing this because I genuinely don't know if I'm the problem or if this is as messed up as it feels. I'm 33, from Munich, and I've been married to my wife for a little over 2 years now. She's 28, grew up in a very well-off family in Zurich, and to be honest, we come from completely different worlds. I always knew that. I just didn't realize how much it would matter to her. Before I met my wife, I was in a relationship for about 3 years with a woman I met while working in Prague. She was kind, funny, and one of the most genuine people I've ever known. It didn't work out for practical reasons. We wanted different things long term, and I eventually moved back to Germany, but there was never any drama, no cheating, nothing toxic, just life going in different directions. When I first told my wife about my past relationships, everything seemed fine. She asked the usual questions, I answered honestly, and that was it. Or at least I thought it was. Things started changing after we ran into someone I used to know during a weekend trip to Vienna. It was an old colleague who casually mentioned my ex in conversation, nothing inappropriate. But on the way back to the hotel, my wife got very quiet. Later that night, she asked me more detailed questions about my ex, what she did for work, where she lived, what her family was like. I didn't think much of it at the time, so I answered, my ex worked in a cafe and did some freelance cleaning jobs. She didn't come from money, didn't go to university, and lived in a small flat outside the city center. That's when everything shifted. My wife literally said, so she was low class. I laughed at first because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Since that night, it's like this has been stuck in her head. She keeps bringing it up in the strangest ways. If we're talking about past memories, she'll suddenly say things like, was that when you were still dating her? In this tone I can't even describe, half judgment, half disbelief. A few weeks ago, it escalated. We were having dinner with some of her friends, people who all come from similar wealthy backgrounds, and somehow the topic of past relationships came up. One of her friends joked about student phase relationships, and my wife, completely unprompted, said something like, well, he dated someone very different before me. The way she said different made everyone pause. I felt it instantly. I tried to brush it off, but she kept going, saying she couldn't understand how I could be with someone who had no ambition and no refinement. I was honestly shocked. Not just embarrassed, but angry. I told her later that night that what she said was disrespectful, not just to my ex, but to me. She didn't back down. She said she's struggling to reconcile the image she has of me with the fact that I lowered myself in the past. That word, lowered, really stuck with me. I asked her what that even means, and she said it's about standards, lifestyle, education, compatibility on a certain level. I told her that compatibility isn't defined by money or status, and that my ex treated me better in many ways than people with all the refinement she talks about. That made things worse. Now she keeps comparing herself to my ex, but not in the way you'd expect. It's not insecurity about looks or personality. It's almost like she's offended that I could ever see value in someone she considers beneath her. She's even gone as far as asking me if I was embarrassed to introduce my ex to my family, which is completely untrue. My family liked her because they care about how someone treats you, not how much money they have. The last argument we had was 2 nights ago. She said she worries that my standards aren't as high as she thought, and that it makes her question my judgment in general, including choosing her. I honestly didn't even know how to respond to that. I told her that if she thinks loving someone kind and hardworking is having low standards, then I don't know what that says about her values. She got really upset and accused me of defending my ex over my own wife. But that's not what this is about. I'm not defending my ex because I still have feelings for her. I don't. That chapter of my life is closed. But I'm also not going to sit there while someone I once cared about is reduced to some kind of stereotype just because she didn't grow up wealthy or have a degree. And more than that, I'm starting to feel like my wife doesn't respect me the way I thought she did. It's not just about my ex anymore. It's about how she sees people, how she measures worth, and what that means for our future, especially if we ever have children. I don't know if this is something that can be worked through or if it's a deeper incompatibility that I somehow ignored in the beginning. I love my wife, but I can't pretend this doesn't bother me. So I guess I'm asking, am I overreacting here? Or is this as serious as it feels? Update. I waited a few days before bringing it up again because I didn't want another argument to spiral the same way, but it didn't exactly go how I hoped. After our last fight, things were quiet. Not peaceful, just tense. She was polite, I was polite, but it felt like we were both avoiding something sitting right in the middle of the room. What pushed me to finally say something again was a phone call with my sister. She asked how things were going, and I guess something in my voice gave it away because she kept pressing until I told her everything. She didn't even hesitate. She said, "That's not about your ex. That's about how she sees people. Be careful." That stuck with me. So that night I told my wife we needed to talk properly. Not argue, not throw comments at each other, but actually sit down and understand what's going on. At first, she seemed open to it. I asked her directly why this bothers her so much, because it clearly isn't just curiosity anymore. She said something that honestly made everything click, but not in a good way. She told me that growing up, her parents were very strict about who you associate with. Not in an obvious, cruel way, but in a very controlled, polished kind of way. Everyone in her circle had a certain background, a certain education, a certain level of income. She said she was raised to believe that this wasn't about arrogance, but about protecting your future. Then she looked at me and said, when I found out about her, it felt like you don't follow those same rules. And that scares me. I asked her why that's scary. She said, because it means you don't see the same red flags I do. That's when I realized this isn't just about my past, it's about how she judges people entirely. I tried to explain that what she sees as red flags, I see as circumstances, that not everyone has the same opportunities, and that doesn't make them less worthy as a person or a partner. She listened, but I could tell she didn't agree. Then the conversation shifted in a way I wasn't expecting. She asked me if I still keep in contact with my ex. I told her no, which is the truth. We haven't spoken in years. Then she asked if I ever think about her. I said occasionally, in the same way anyone thinks about people from their past. Not in a romantic way, just memories. That answer clearly bothered her. She went quiet for a moment, then said something that honestly hit me harder than anything else so far. She said, I don't think I can ever respect that version of you. Not my ex. Me, that version of me. I asked her what she meant, and she said she struggles to accept that I was okay being in a relationship that, in her words, lacks standards. I don't think I've ever felt that kind of disappointment in a relationship before. Not anger, just disappointment. I told her that the version of me she's talking about is still me, that I haven't changed my values and I don't want to, that if she expects me to look down on people to fit into her world, I can't do that. That's when things got more emotional than before. She started crying, which she almost never does, and said she feels like she doesn't really know me anymore, that she built an image of who I am and now it doesn't match. And I said, maybe that's the problem. You built an image instead of actually seeing me. That didn't go well. We didn't yell, but the conversation just kind of collapsed after that. She went to sleep in the other room. Since then, things have been even more distant. But here's the part that really made me start questioning everything. Yesterday, we were having coffee, and completely out of nowhere, she said, if we have children, I don't want them exposed to that kind of environment. I asked her what she meant, even though I already knew. She said she wants to make sure our future kids grow up with the right influences and that she wouldn't be comfortable with them being around people who don't meet certain standards. I asked her directly if she means people like my ex. She didn't answer right away. Then she just said, you know what I mean. And I did. That was the moment it stopped being about the past for me. Because now I'm thinking about the future. About raising kids with someone who might teach them to measure people's worth based on money, education, or social status. I asked her if she realizes how that sounds, and she said I'm twisting her words, that she just wants the best for our future family. But to me, the best shouldn't mean teaching them to look down on others. We haven't resolved anything. If anything, it feels like we've uncovered something deeper that neither of us can ignore now. I still love her. That hasn't changed. But I'm starting to wonder if love is enough when your core values don't line up like this. Final update. I took some time before writing this because I didn't want to react emotionally and then regret what I said. A lot has happened since my last update, and I think I finally have clarity, even if it's not the kind I wanted. A few days after that conversation about children, I realized I couldn't just let things sit anymore. It wasn't just tension or a disagreement. It felt like we were standing on completely different ground, and pretending otherwise was only making it worse. So I suggested we take a short trip together, just the two of us, away from everything. We ended up going to Salzburg. I thought maybe if we got out of our usual environment, we could actually talk without all the pressure and distractions. The first day was okay. We walked around, had dinner, tried to act normal. But it felt forced, like both of us were waiting for the real conversation. It happened that night. I told her calmly that I need to understand if this is something she's willing to rethink or if this is a fixed belief for her, not just about my ex, but about people in general. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said something very direct. She said, I can try not to say it out loud, but I can't promise I'll feel differently. That was the moment everything became very real, because it wasn't just about comments anymore. It was about how she genuinely sees the world and that she doesn't actually think it's wrong. I asked her if she believes people who don't come from wealth or higher education are inherently less suitable as partners, friends, or influences. She hesitated, but then said, not always, but often, yes. I appreciated the honesty, but at the same time, it felt like a door closing. I told her that I can't build a life with someone who sees people that way. Not because of my ex specifically, but because it goes against everything I believe in. I said, I don't want to spend the rest of my life filtering friendships, judging others, or worrying about whether someone is good enough to be part of our lives. She got emotional again, but this time it wasn't defensive. It was more like fear. She said she feels like she's losing me over something she was raised to believe is normal. That in her world, this isn't considered cruel, it's considered practical. And I told her I understand that. I really do. But understanding where it comes from doesn't mean I can accept it as part of my future. We talked for hours after that. Probably the most honest conversation we've ever had. At one point, she asked me if I regret marrying her. That question hurt more than anything else. I told her no, I don't regret loving her, and I don't regret the life we've had so far, but I do regret that we didn't have these conversations earlier, before we got married. Because now, it's not just two people dating, it's a shared life that's suddenly uncertain. The next morning, we both kind of knew where things were heading, even if neither of us said it right away. On the train back, she reached for my hand and said she doesn't want to lose me, but she also doesn't know how to change something that feels so deeply ingrained in her. And I told her I don't want to lose her either, but I also don't want to slowly become someone I'm not just to make this work. When we got home, we agreed to take some space, not in a dramatic way, no shouting, no sudden decisions, but an actual, intentional pause. She's staying with a friend for now. We've spoken a few times since then, and the conversations have been calmer, more reflective. She told me she's considering therapy, not because she thinks she's wrong, but because she wants to understand why this matters so much to her. And I told her I respect that. I really do. As for me, I've been thinking a lot about what I want my life to look like long term, what kind of environment I want to build, what kind of values I want to hold on to, and what I want to pass on if I ever have children. And the truth is, I can't compromise on this. It's not about choosing my ex over my wife. It never was. It's about choosing the kind of person I want to be. Right now, we're still technically married, but we've both acknowledged that if nothing changes, we're probably heading towards separation. There's no hatred between us, no betrayal, just a painful realization that love doesn't always fix fundamental differences. I didn't expect my past relationship to play any role in my marriage years later, but somehow it became the thing that exposed everything we never talked about. I don't know what the final outcome will be yet. Maybe she'll reflect and change. Maybe I'll learn something I haven't seen yet. Or maybe this is just where our paths split. But for the first time in weeks, I feel clear. And even though it hurts, I think that clarity is something I needed. Stories number 5. I don't even know if I handled this the right way anymore, and it's been eating at me for weeks. I keep replaying the whole thing in my head, wondering if I should have just stayed quiet like she asked, or if I did exactly what anyone decent would do. I'm 29, living in Lyon, and my husband, Mark 32, has a younger brother, Julian 27. Julian has been with his girlfriend, Sophia 26, for about 2 years. They live together in a small flat not far from us, and we all see each other pretty often, family dinners, weekend drinks, that kind of thing. Nothing unusual. We were all pretty close, or at least I thought we were. Sophia and I got along well from the start. We weren't best friends, but we had that easy kind of connection where you can talk about normal life things, work stress, relationships, random gossip. She's originally from Milan and moved here for work, so I think she appreciated having someone she could talk to outside of Julian. About a month ago, Sophia asked me to meet her for coffee. Just the two of us. That wasn't weird on its own, but there was something about the way she texted, kind of urgent but vague, that made me feel like something was off. We met at this small cafe near the river. She looked nervous the moment I saw her, not just a little anxious, like properly shaken. She kept stirring her coffee without drinking it, avoiding eye contact, and I remember thinking, okay, this is not just casual chat. Eventually, she just said it. She told me she wasn't sure she loved Julian anymore, that she felt trapped, that things had become routine and suffocating. I didn't really know what to say at first, so I just listened. Then she dropped the part that made my stomach turn. She admitted that she had been seeing someone else. Not just talking, actually meeting him, sleeping with him for a few weeks. That's exactly how she phrased it, like it was something temporary and not a huge betrayal. I asked her if Julian knew. She immediately said no. Then she grabbed my hand and said, "Please don't tell him. I just needed to tell someone. I'll figure it out." That moment is where everything started to feel wrong. I told her she needed to tell him herself. I said it wasn't fair to keep him in the dark, especially if she was already emotionally checked out of the relationship. She nodded, but it didn't feel convincing. It felt like she just wanted me to agree to stay quiet. Before we left, she made me promise not to say anything. She kept repeating it like, "Please, this stays between us." And I didn't explicitly say I promise, but I also didn't clearly refuse. I just said, "You need to fix this." For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time we saw Julian, it felt unbearable. He was completely normal, joking, talking about future plans, even mentioning maybe proposing to Sophia later this year. That part hit me hard. I remember sitting there, smiling awkwardly, while inside I felt sick. Mark noticed something was off with me, but I didn't tell him right away. I didn't want to drag him into it. But after about a week, I broke. I told him everything. Mark was furious. Not at me, at Sophia. He said Julian deserved to know immediately. He didn't even hesitate. But he also said it might be better coming from me, since I was the one she told. That didn't sit right with me. I didn't want to be the one to blow everything up. I kept thinking maybe Sophia would come clean on her own, so I gave it a few more days. Nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. We had dinner together one night, and Sophia acted completely normal. Laughing, holding Julian's hand, talking about booking a trip together. Watching that felt surreal, like I was the only one who knew this whole other reality underneath. After that night, I couldn't justify staying silent anymore, so I asked Julian if we could talk, just the two of us. We met in a park nearby. I was shaking the whole time, trying to figure out how to even start the conversation. In the end, I just told him. I said there was something he needed to know about Sophia, and that I wouldn't feel right keeping it from him. Then I told him what she had told me, about not loving him the same way about the other guy. I didn't exaggerate anything. I didn't add my own opinions. I just repeated what she said. He didn't react the way I expected. He didn't yell or get angry right away. He just went quiet, like completely still. Then he asked me if I was sure. I said yes. He thanked me. That part surprised me. He actually said, "Thank you for telling me," but he looked completely broken. Later that night, everything exploded. Julian confronted Sophia. There was shouting, crying, the whole thing. She admitted it, but then she immediately turned it back on me. She said I had betrayed her trust, that I had no right to interfere, that she specifically asked me to keep it a secret. Now the family is divided. Julian isn't speaking to her anymore. He moved out temporarily and is staying with a friend. Mark supports me completely, but he's also angry because this has created tension between him and his brother, who is now obviously going through a lot. Sophia has been sending me messages saying I ruined her life, that I should have given her time to handle it, that I've caused unnecessary pain. Some of her friends even reached out, saying I crossed a line. And now I'm stuck in this place where I genuinely don't know if I did the right thing. On one hand, I feel like Julian deserved to know the truth, especially before making any bigger commitments. On the other hand, I did go against what Sophia asked me to do, and I was the one who exposed everything instead of her. I keep wondering if I should have waited longer. Maybe she would have told him eventually. Maybe I took that chance away from her. But then I think about how normal she acted, how she kept lying to his face, and I feel like I couldn't just stand by and watch it happen. So yeah, I told my brother-in-law the truth about what his girlfriend told me, even though she asked me not to. And now I honestly don't know if I'm the one who crossed the line. Update. It's been about 3 weeks since everything blew up, and somehow things have gotten both clearer and more complicated at the same time. I kept putting off writing this because I thought maybe things would settle down or become more straightforward, but that hasn't really happened. Julian and Sophia are officially over now. Not in a messy on a breakaway, but completely done. He went back to the flat a couple of days after I told him, packed his things while she was at work, and left. He's been staying with his friend Lucas in Marseille since then, which honestly worried me at first, because it felt like he was running away from everything. But I spoke to him a few times, and it sounds like he just needed distance. The first time we talked after everything, I was bracing myself for him to be angry at me. I kept thinking that once the shock wore off, he might start blaming me for how it all came out. But he didn't. If anything, he was calmer than I expected. He told me that after confronting Sophia, he realized there had been signs for months, her being distant, always on her phone, making excuses to go out alone, but he ignored it because he trusted her. That part really stuck with me. He also told me something I didn't know before. Apparently, Sophia didn't just admit to a few weeks like she told me. When he pressed her, it turned out it had been going on for almost 3 months, and it wasn't just physical. She had been seriously considering leaving him for this other man, whose name is Matteo. Hearing that made me feel sick because it confirmed what I suspected, that she wasn't planning to come clean anytime soon. But at the same time, things took a turn I didn't expect at all. About a week after the breakup, Sophia showed up at our door. I wasn't even the one who opened it. Mark did, and from the look on his face, I knew immediately it was going to be bad. She insisted on coming in, said she needed to talk to both of us. I honestly thought she was going to apologize, or at least try to explain herself in a calmer way. Instead, she was angry. Not loud at first, but very controlled, the kind of anger that feels colder and sharper. She said I had destroyed her relationship by interfering. That yes, she had made mistakes, but that relationships are complicated and I had no right to play judge and executioner. She kept repeating that I took away her chance to fix things on her own terms. I tried to stay calm and told her again that I had given her time, that I had waited, hoping she would tell Julian herself, that I couldn't keep lying to his face while he was talking about proposing. That part seemed to hit something, because she went quiet for a second, but then she doubled down. She said if I really cared about Julian, I would have supported the relationship instead of sabotaging it. That maybe she just needed time to figure out her feelings, and I forced everything to collapse before she could do that. Mark stepped in at that point because he was getting visibly angry. He told her very directly that the relationship collapsed because of her actions, not mine. That cheating for months isn't figuring things out, it's betrayal. That conversation got heated quickly, and eventually he told her she needed to leave. Before she left, she said something that's been stuck in my head ever since. She said, "You think you did something noble. All you did was make yourself feel better." I wish I could say that didn't get to me, but it did. Since then, I've had a lot of time to sit with everything. Some of Sophia's friends have continued to message me, though less frequently now. Most of them have a similar stance, that I should have stayed out of it, that it wasn't my relationship to interfere in. A couple of them even said that, in their culture, this kind of thing should always be handled privately between the couple, no matter what. But here's the part that changed things for me the most. Last weekend, Julian came back to Lyon for a couple of days, and we spent a lot of time together. Just the three of us, him, Mark, and me. At one point, Mark stepped out to grab groceries, and it was just me and Julian sitting in the living room. It got quiet, and I could feel that there was something he wanted to say. He told me that the night he confronted Sophia, he almost didn't believe me. He said a part of him was hoping I was wrong or that there was some misunderstanding. But the moment he saw her reaction, he knew it was true. Then he said something I didn't expect at all. He said if I hadn't told him, he probably would have proposed within the next few months. He had already been looking at rings. He even showed me a picture on his phone of one he had saved. I genuinely didn't know what to say to that. It just made everything feel heavier. He told me that as much as it hurt, it would have been worse to find out after getting engaged or married. That he's been going back and forth between anger and relief. Angry at her for what she did, but relieved that he found out before making a bigger mistake. Then he looked at me and said, "You didn't ruin anything. You just ended something that was already broken." That was the first moment since all of this started where I felt like maybe I could breathe again. But even with that, I still have moments where I question myself, especially at night when everything is quiet and I start replaying Sophia's words, wondering if I acted too quickly or if I crossed a boundary that wasn't mine to cross. I don't regret telling Julian. I think deep down I know that. But I do regret how messy everything became, how it affected the family dynamic, how there's now this lingering tension that probably won't go away anytime soon. Mark and I are fine. If anything, this brought us closer, but there's definitely a distance now when it comes to anything related to Sophia or that entire situation, and I don't think she's going to forgive me anytime soon, if ever. As for Julian, he's still figuring things out. He's focusing on work, spending time with friends, trying to rebuild his routine. He seems stronger each time I talk to him, but there's still a sadness there that I don't think will disappear quickly. So that's where things stand now. I told the truth, and it changed everything. And even now, I'm still sitting with the weight of what that truth did. Final update. I waited a while before writing this because I didn't want to post something emotional or unfinished. I needed to see where things actually landed, not just where they were heading. Enough time has passed now that I can finally say this whole situation has reached some kind of ending, maybe not a perfect one, but a real one. The biggest thing is that Julian is okay. Not completely over it and thriving in some dramatic way, but steady, grounded, back in control of his life again. And honestly, that matters more than anything else. He moved back to Lyon about a month after my last update, but not into the flat he shared with Sophia. He found a small place on his own. It's nothing fancy, but it's his. I helped him pick out furniture one weekend, which felt strange at first, like we were stepping into a version of life that wasn't supposed to exist, but it also felt like progress. There was a moment that stuck with me. We were building this cheap wooden shelf, struggling with the instructions and laughing about it, and out of nowhere he said, "I think I would have been miserable if I married her." Not in a bitter way, not even angry, just very matter of fact. Like he had finally processed it. That's when I knew he had really started to move on. As for Sophia, things didn't go the way she thought they would. For a while after the breakup, she stayed with this other guy, Matteo, the one she had been seeing behind Julian's back. From what I heard through mutual connections, she moved in with him pretty quickly, which honestly sounded like she was trying to justify everything by making it worth it. But it didn't last. About 6 weeks ago, she reached out to Mark first. Not me. She asked if Julian was doing okay, which already felt strange considering everything. Mark kept it short and didn't engage much. Then, a few days later, she messaged me. I stared at her name on my phone for a long time before opening it. Part of me didn't want to read it at all, but curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. She said things hadn't worked out with Matteo, that it wasn't what she thought it would be, that she had made a series of bad decisions and was now dealing with the consequences. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking and that maybe she had been unfair to me. That was the closest thing to accountability I've seen from her. But then she added that she still believed I should have stayed out of it, that even if I thought I was doing the right thing, it wasn't my place. That line was still there, like she couldn't fully let go of blaming me. And surprisingly, reading that didn't make me angry anymore. A few months ago, I would have wanted to argue, to defend myself again, to make her understand. But this time I just felt done. Not in a cold or cruel way, just in a very clear, settled way. So I replied, and I kept it simple. I told her I was sorry things turned out the way they did, but I didn't regret telling Julian that he deserved the truth and I would make the same choice again. I didn't insult her, didn't reopen old arguments. Just stated it and left it there. She didn't respond after that. And I think that was the final closure between us. The family situation has mostly stabilized. There's still a bit of awkwardness when her name comes up, but it's not the tense, explosive feeling it was before. It's more like a chapter everyone quietly agrees is over. Mark told me something recently that I didn't realize I needed to hear. He said he was proud of me, not in a dramatic way, just casually, like it was obvious to him. He said a lot of people would have stayed quiet to avoid conflict, but that I chose to do something difficult because it was right. And I realized that's really what this comes down to. For a long time, I kept asking myself if I crossed a line, if I interfered where I shouldn't have, if I made things worse instead of better. But now, with everything that's happened, I see it differently. I didn't create the situation. I didn't break their relationship. I didn't lie or manipulate or act out of jealousy or spite. I was put in a position where I knew something that directly affected someone I care about, and I had to choose between protecting a secret or telling the truth. And I chose the truth. It wasn't clean. It wasn't painless. It didn't make me look like the good person in everyone's eyes. But it prevented something bigger, something more permanent, from happening under false pretenses. Julian is rebuilding his life now. Slowly, but genuinely. He's even started seeing someone new, not serious yet, but enough that I can hear a different tone in his voice when he talks about her. Lighter, hopeful. And me, I finally sleep better. I don't replay that cafe conversation in my head anymore. I don't second guess every word I said. The weight that sat on my chest for weeks is gone. Sophia was right about one thing in a way. Telling the truth did make me feel better, but not because it was easy. Stories number 6, I thought I was just bad with money until I realized someone else had been quietly taking it one grocery trip at a time. I don't even know how to explain how small it started because that's probably why I didn't notice sooner. My name is Sophia, I'm 28, living in Lyon, and my boyfriend Mark is 41. We've been together for just over a year and a half. When we first met, I actually thought the age gap worked in our favor. He seemed stable, calm, already established in his career as a project manager. Compared to men my age, he felt grounded, predictable in a comforting way. I had just moved into his apartment about 8 months ago. It made sense at the time. He owned the place, it was closer to my work, and we were spending most nights together anyway. We agreed to split groceries and small household expenses, but he covered rent and utilities since it was his property. At first, everything felt balanced. I would usually be the one doing the grocery shopping because my office is near a supermarket. Sometimes we'd go together on weekends, but most of the time it was just me after work. I'd use my debit card, no big deal. Occasionally, Mark would come along and pay for a few things or pick up extras later. About 3 months ago, I started noticing something odd. I'd check my bank app and see amounts that didn't quite match what I remembered spending. Nothing huge, maybe do 20 more here, a 30 there. I brushed it off at first. Prices have gone up, I told myself. Maybe I grabbed something extra and forgot. Maybe I misread the total at checkout. I've never been particularly strict with tracking every cent, so it didn't immediately raise alarm bells. But it kept happening. Every week or so, there would be these slightly higher charges. Not enough to cause a crisis, but enough to make me feel like I was losing control of my own finances. I remember one specific evening that made me pause longer than usual. I had gone to a Carrefour near my office, bought some basics, vegetables, pasta, cleaning supplies. I distinctly remembered the total being around 52 because I had a 50 note in my wallet and joked with the cashier about almost making it. But when I checked my account later, the charge was 82. That's not a rounding error. That's not inflation. I even went back through my bag, checked the receipt, convinced I must have missed something. But the receipt said 52. That's when I felt the first real wave of confusion. I opened my banking app again, thinking maybe I was looking at the wrong transaction. But no, the charge listed for that exact time, that exact store, was 82. I actually thought it was a bank error. The next day, I called my bank. After being passed around a bit, a woman finally explained it to me in a very neutral tone, like she was saying something completely ordinary. That includes a cash back withdrawal of 30. I went quiet. I didn't withdraw any cash. I said, well, she replied, the transaction shows that cash was requested at the point of sale using your card and PIN. That made no sense. I don't use cash much. I definitely didn't request it that day. I hung up feeling unsettled, but not yet panicked. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I pressed something accidentally. Maybe the cashier made a mistake. It felt unlikely, but I didn't have a better explanation. Then it happened again and again. Once you notice a pattern, you can't unsee it. I went back through my statements for the past couple of months and started lining up the grocery purchases with the amounts deducted. It was like everything clicked into place in the worst possible way. Almost every time the amount was higher than expected, it matched a round number difference, 20, 440 or 50, cash back amounts. My stomach dropped because there was only one other person who regularly had my card in his hand. Mark. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I really didn't. So I tried to think of any other possible explanation. Maybe the card machine was faulty. Maybe there was some kind of fraud happening at the store. But the transactions only happened on days when Mark had been with me or had gone to the store himself with my card. I started remembering little moments I hadn't thought twice about before, like when we'd be at the checkout and he'd say, I'll handle it and take my card because my hands were full. Or when he'd go pick up a few things on his way home and I'd say, just use my card, it's in my bag. I trusted him completely, or at least I thought I did. The worst part is that I didn't confront him immediately. I wish I could say I did, that I was decisive and strong, but the truth is I sat with it for days. I watched him, not in an obvious way, but quietly trying to see if anything else felt off. He was the same as always, affectionate, calm, asking about my day, cooking dinner sometimes. There was no sign of guilt, no nervous behavior, nothing that would make you think he was doing something like this. That almost made it worse, because it meant this wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, and he was comfortable enough with it to act completely normal afterward. I finally decided I needed proof before I said anything. A few days later, we went grocery shopping together at a Monoprix near our apartment. I paid attention to everything this time. I kept track of the items, watched the total as it came up on the screen, 64. Mark was the one holding my card. I'll do it, he said casually, already stepping forward. I didn't stop him. I watched. The cashier asked something quietly. I couldn't hear exactly what, but I saw Mark nod. He entered my PIN. The machine beeped, and we left like nothing happened. I didn't say a word on the way home. As soon as we got inside, I checked my banking app. To 114. My hands actually started shaking. That was 50 in cash. I walked into the living room where he was unpacking groceries like everything was completely normal. Mark, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Why was the charge you 100 through? He didn't even look surprised. Oh, he said, like it was nothing. I took some cash out. I just stared at him. You took cash from my card? Yeah, he said, still calm. I needed it. That was it. No hesitation. No apology. No explanation beyond that. You didn't think to ask me? I said. He finally looked at me then, like he was slightly annoyed that I was making it into a bigger deal. I was going to tell you, he said. It's not a big deal, Sophia. Not a big deal. I felt something shift in me at that moment. How many times have you done this? I asked. He shrugged. A few times. I didn't keep track. I actually laughed, but it didn't sound like me. I have. I said, it's been happening for months. He sighed like I was being difficult. Okay, and we live together. We share expenses. That's not sharing, I said. That's taking money from my account without telling me. It's not like I'm stealing, he replied. I spend money on us too. That sentence made my chest tighten, because suddenly I realized something I hadn't fully articulated before. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that he felt entitled to it, that he didn't see anything wrong with using my card, entering my PN, and taking cash for himself without even mentioning it. How much, Mark? I asked quietly. How much have you taken in total? He hesitated for the first time. I don't know, he said. maybe a few hundred. It's more than that. I know it is. I've done the math. It's closer to 600, maybe more. But the exact number almost doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I trusted him completely. I gave him access to my card, my PIN, my life, and he used that access in a way that benefited him without my knowledge. We argued after that, not loudly, but intensely. He kept minimizing it, saying he would pay me back, that I was overreacting, that couples support each other financially. But I never agreed to support him like this. I never agreed to be taken advantage of quietly, in small amounts over time, hoping I wouldn't notice. I slept on the couch that night, and now I'm sitting here trying to figure out what this actually means. Because it's not just about 600s. It's about trust. It's about respect. And it's about the uncomfortable realization that the man I thought was stable and grounded might just be someone who knows how to make his actions seem smaller than they really are. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never look at him or my bank account the same way again. Update. I didn't expect things to escalate as quickly as they did after that night, but once something like this comes out, it doesn't just sit quietly in the background. It changes how you see everything, and suddenly all the small things you ignored before start lining up in a way that's impossible to unsee. The morning after I slept on the couch, Mark acted like nothing serious had happened. He made coffee, asked if I wanted some, even kissed my head like he usually does before work. That normal behavior felt almost surreal, like we were in two completely different versions of reality. In his, this was a minor disagreement. In mine, something fundamental had just broken. I didn't respond much. I just watched him, trying to understand how someone could be so calm after admitting to something that, at least to me, felt like a massive breach of trust. Before he left, he said, "We'll talk later, okay? I'll sort it out." That phrase stuck with me, "I'll sort it out," because it sounded like he still didn't fully understand what needed sorting. The first thing I did after he left was call my bank again. This time, I asked them to go through the transactions in detail. The woman on the phone was more direct than the first one. If someone used your card and PN to withdraw cash without your consent, that's considered unauthorized use, she said. Even if it's someone you know. Hearing it framed like that made my stomach twist. Unauthorized use. Not a misunderstanding. Not a shared expense. Something else. I spent the next hour going through every single transaction from the past 3 months. I wrote everything down, dates, amounts, differences. When I finished, the number was worse than I had originally thought. 2740? Seeing it written down made it real in a way that just a few hundred never could. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry at that moment. I just felt cold, like something had settled into place that I couldn't undo. When Mark got home that evening, I was sitting at the table with my laptop open. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed immediately, like he was already tired of the situation. "Sophie, I told you I'll give it back." "That's not enough," I said. "Sit down." He hesitated, then sat across from me. I turned the laptop toward him. I went through everything, I said. "It's U740. He looked at the screen, then back at me. "That seems high," he said. I almost laughed again, but it came out sharper this time. "It's not seems, it is. These are the transactions. These are the cash back amounts." He leaned back in his chair. "Okay," he said. "Fine. I didn't realize it added up like that." "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "You didn't realize because you weren't thinking about it. Because it wasn't your money." That hit something. I could see it in his expression, but instead of apologizing, he got defensive. "I contribute to this household," he said. "I pay the rent, the utilities." And I never argued about that. I interrupted. "We had an agreement. This wasn't part of it." "I wasn't trying to screw you over," he said. "I just needed cash sometimes, and it was easier." "Easier," for I said. There a long pause after that. Then I said something I hadn't planned, but it came out anyway. "You used my P, Mark. You knew exactly what you were doing every single time." That's when he finally stopped arguing, because there's no way to spin that. He looked down at the table and stayed quiet for a while. "I'll transfer you the money," he said eventually. "All of it." "And then what?" I asked. He looked up confused. "What do you mean? I mean, what happens after that? Do we just go back to normal?" He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. Because the truth is, the money was never the real issue. It was just the most visible part of something deeper. "I don't trust you," I said. That was the first time I had said it out loud. It hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. He looked hurt, but also frustrated. "You're acting like I committed a crime," he said. I held his gaze. "You did something without my consent, repeatedly, involving my finances, and didn't tell me for months," I said. "What would you call that?" He didn't respond. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever. Then he said, quieter this time, "I didn't think you'd react like this." That sentence stayed with me more than anything else. Because it meant he had thought about the possibility of me finding out and had decided it wouldn't matter enough to stop. "I think that's the problem," I said. "You didn't think it would matter to me." That night didn't end in a resolution. He transferred 500 immediately and said he'd send the rest after his next paycheck. I didn't argue about that part. The money felt secondary at that point. What mattered was what I did next. I didn't sleep on the couch again. I packed a bag. Not dramatically, not in a rush, just methodically. Clothes, essentials, my documents, my laptop. Things I knew I'd need if I didn't come back for a while. Mark watched me from the doorway. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I need space," I said. "You're leaving. Over this. Over this again." "Yes," I said. "Because it's not just this." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated now. "This is insane, Sophia. Couples go through worse than this." "Maybe," I said. "But I don't think I want to be in a relationship where this is considered normal." He didn't try to stop me after that. I think part of him genuinely believed I would calm down and come back in a few days. That this was just a reaction, not a decision. I'm staying with my friend Ingrid now, on the other side of the city. It's been about a week. Mark has texted me every day. At first, it was practical, asking if I got there safely, telling me he transferred more money. Then it turned into longer messages. Apologies, explanations, promises. I didn't realize how wrong it was. I should have asked you. I miss you. I want to fix this. I haven't responded. Not because I'm trying to punish him, but because I genuinely don't know what I would say. I keep going back to that moment at the checkout, watching him nod, enter my PIN, take cash like it was nothing. That level of comfort doesn't come from a one-time mistake. It comes from a mindset. And I don't know if that's something that changes just because he got caught. At the same time, I keep remembering the good parts. The dinners, the quiet evenings, the way he used to make me feel safe. It's not easy to reconcile those memories with what I now know. But I think the hardest part is accepting that both can be true. Someone can be kind to you in many ways and still cross a line that changes everything. Right now, I'm trying to focus on practical things. I've ordered a new debit card. I've changed my pen. I've started looking at apartments, even though the idea of moving again so soon feels exhausting. I haven't decided yet if this relationship is completely over. But I do know this. If I go back, it won't be because he paid me back or because he said the right things. It would have to be because I genuinely believe he understands what he did and why it matters. And right now, I'm not sure he does. Final update. I think I've rewritten this in my head 100 times over the past few weeks, trying to find the version of events that makes the most sense, or at least hurts the least. But the truth is, nothing about this situation is neat or satisfying. It just ends. After I left and stayed with Ingrid, things didn't explode or collapse overnight. There wasn't some big final argument that made everything obvious. Instead, it was a slow unraveling of something I had already started to let go of. Mark kept texting for the first couple of weeks, like I said before. Apologies, long messages, voice notes even. He sent the remaining 240 like he promised, and at one point he wrote out a full breakdown of what he said he had taken, trying to show transparency. But something about it felt late. Not fake exactly, but reactive, like he was finally understanding the consequences, not the behavior itself. I did eventually reply. Not right away, but after about 10 days of silence from my side, I sent him a message. "I got the money. Thank you." That's all I said. He responded almost instantly. "Can we talk, please?" I agreed, but only because I needed clarity more than anything else. Not closure in a dramatic sense, just a clean understanding of where things stood. We met in a small cafe near Place Bellecour. Neutral ground. I didn't want to go back to the apartment, and I didn't want him in Ingrid's space either. When he walked in, he looked tired. Not just physically, but like something had finally settled on him. He hugged me, but I didn't hug him back the same way. It was brief, distant. We sat down, ordered coffee, and for a few minutes, neither of us said anything. Then he started. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, which I think is the standard opening line for these kinds of conversations. I know I messed up. I didn't realize how serious it was at the time, but I do now. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I crossed a line. He continued. "I should have asked you. I should have respected your boundaries, especially with something like money." That was probably the most accurate thing he had said since all of this started. And I asked. He looked at me like he was trying to read my expression. "And I want to fix it," he said. "I want us to go back to how we were. I'll earn your trust again. I'll be better." There it was again. That idea that we could just return to a previous version of things, as if this was a detour instead of a turning point. I took a breath before responding. "I don't think we can go back," I said. His face fell slightly. "Why not?" he asked. "I'm doing everything I can to make this right." "I know," I said, "and I appreciate that. But this isn't just about fixing a mistake. It's about what the mistake says." He frowned, not fully understanding. "You didn't just take money once," I said. "You did it repeatedly over months. You used my card, my PIN, without telling me, and you were comfortable enough with it that you didn't even think it was a big deal." "I told you. I didn't think it through." "That's exactly it," I interrupted gently. "You didn't think about me in those moments." That landed. He didn't argue this time. "I wasn't a factor in your decision," I continued. "Not my consent, not my feelings, not my trust. And that's not something I can just reset because you feel bad now. He looked down at his coffee, then back at me. So what are you saying? He asked quietly. I already knew the answer before I said it, but saying it out loud made it real in a different way. I'm saying I don't want to continue this relationship. There it was. Final, simple, and heavier than anything else I could have said. He sat there, processing it. You're ending it? Completely? He asked. Yes. But I've paid you back, he said, almost reflexively. And that's when I realized something important. For him, the transaction still mattered more than the trust. I know, I said. And that's good. But this was never just about the money. He didn't have a response to that. I don't hate you, I added, because it was true. I don't even think you're a bad person. But I don't feel safe sharing a life with someone who can cross a boundary like that and not recognize it until after. He nodded slowly, like he was finally understanding something he hadn't before. I didn't think you'd leave over this, he said. I gave a small, sad smile. I know, I replied. That's part of the problem. We sat there for a while longer, but the conversation was essentially over. There wasn't anything left to negotiate or fix. When we stood up to leave, he asked one last question. Is there anything I could have done differently after you found out? I thought about it for a moment. Maybe, I said. But I think the truth is, by the time I found out, the damage was already done. He nodded. We said goodbye outside the cafe. No promises to stay in touch, no maybe in the future, no soft landing. Just a quiet, mutual understanding that this was the end. And that was it. No dramatic aftermath, no sudden regret or change of heart. Just a gradual adjustment to a new reality. It's been about 6 weeks since that conversation. I've moved into a small studio on my own. It's not as nice as Mark's apartment, but it's mine, and that feels more important right now than anything else. The first few days alone were harder than I expected. Not because I missed him specifically, but because I had gotten used to sharing space, routines, little daily habits. Everything felt slightly off, but then something shifted again. I started noticing how peaceful it was to not second-guess things. To not wonder if I was overreacting or if I was being too sensitive. To not feel that quiet anxiety about what I might be missing. My finances feel different too, in a way I didn't expect. Not just because I'm not losing money, but because I feel in control again. Every transaction is mine. Every decision is mine. There's something grounding about that. Ingrid said something to me recently that stuck. You didn't just leave because of what he did, she said. You left because of what it revealed. And she's right. It revealed a gap in values that I hadn't fully seen before. A difference in how we view boundaries, respect, and what's acceptable in a relationship. I don't think Mark is going to go around doing this to everyone he dates. I genuinely think this experience shook him, and maybe he'll learn from it. But I also don't think it's my responsibility to stay and teach him that lesson at my own expense. That's the part I've finally made peace with. Sometimes, someone can be good in many ways and still not be right for you in the ways that matter most. And sometimes, the thing that ends a relationship isn't the biggest, loudest betrayal, but the quiet realization that you deserve something fundamentally different. I don't feel angry anymore. Stories number 7. I didn't invite my family to my wedding after overhearing something they said about me, and now everything is falling apart. I never imagined my wedding would turn into something like this. When I got engaged, I thought the hardest decisions would be things like venues, guest lists, or whether to go with a live band or a DJ. I didn't think I'd end up cutting out almost my entire family because of something I heard by accident. I'm 31, living in Ghent, and I've been with my partner, Elise, for almost 6 years. She's 29, and she's honestly the most grounded, kind, and emotionally stable person I've ever met. Being with her has always felt easy in a way nothing else in my life has been. My relationship with my family, on the other hand, has always been complicated. I grew up in a small town outside Bruges. My parents, Mark and Helene, are very traditional, very image-conscious people. Appearances matter a lot to them. What the neighbors think, what extended family thinks, how things look. My older brother, Thomas, fits perfectly into that world. Stable job, married young, 2 kids, bought a house near my parents. He's basically the blueprint. I've always been the outlier. I moved away, studied something they didn't really understand, took a less secure career path, and then there's Elise. Not because there's anything wrong with her, she's incredible, but because she's different from what my parents expected from me. She's more outspoken, independent, not the type to just nod along to everything. They've always been polite to her. That's the word I'd use. Polite, but never warm. I used to tell myself that was enough. That not everyone has a close-knit family, and as long as things weren't openly hostile, it was fine. Then I got engaged. When I told my parents, my mother cried, but it felt performative. Like she was reacting the way she thought she was supposed to, not because she was genuinely happy. My father shook my hand like I'd just closed a business deal. Still, I invited them to be part of the process. Dress shopping, venue visits, dinner plans. They showed up, but it always felt like they were observing, not participating. There were small comments too, My mother once asked if Elise was sure about her dress choice because it was a bit bold. My father asked about the guest list in a way that made it clear he was more concerned about who would be there than the actual wedding. But nothing that crossed a line. Nothing I could point to and say, this is why I'm done. Until about 3 months ago, it was my father's birthday. They were hosting a small gathering at their house, just immediate family and a couple of close relatives. Elise couldn't make it because she had work, so I went alone. At some point in the evening, I went upstairs to use the bathroom. Their house is old, and the walls carry sound more than you'd expect. As I was about to come back down, I heard voices coming from the living room. My name came up, so I paused. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. It was my mother, my father, my brother, and my aunt, Ingrid. At first, it sounded like normal conversation. Then my aunt asked something like, "Do you think this will last?" And my mother laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a polite one, a real, dismissive laugh. She said, "Honestly, I give it a few years, maybe less." I felt my stomach drop. My father added, "He's always been like this." Jumps into things thinking they're different, special. Then reality sets in. My brother said something like, "Elise is not exactly the type to adapt. She's very set in her ways." And then my mother again. She was never what we imagined for him. But what can you do? At least we can have a proper wedding out of it. That part is what stayed with me. A proper wedding out of it. Like the entire thing was some kind of event for them, not my life, not my relationship. I stood there for I don't even know how long, just listening. They went on talking about how I've always been difficult, how I reject stability, how this was probably just another phase. Not one of them defended me. Not one of them said anything positive about Elise or about us as a couple. I didn't go back downstairs right away. I just stood there, trying to process what I just heard. When I finally did go back, they acted completely normal. Smiling, asking me if I wanted more wine, like nothing had happened. I played along. I don't even know how I managed it. That night changed something in me. I didn't confront them. I didn't tell Elise immediately either. I just kept it to myself and started seeing everything differently. Every polite comment felt fake. Every smile felt like a performance. I realized that the version of support they'd been giving me wasn't real. It was just surface level for appearances. A couple of weeks later, Elise and I were finalizing the guest list. We had already talked about keeping it relatively small, close friends, immediate family, people who genuinely mattered to us. When we got to my side, I hesitated. Elise noticed immediately. She asked what was wrong. That's when I told her everything. What I overheard, who said how it made me feel. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "That's really hurtful." I expected her to tell me to talk to them, to try to fix it. Instead, she said, "Do you actually want them there?" That question hit harder than anything else. Because when I thought about it honestly, the answer wasn't yes. I didn't want people at my wedding who were quietly waiting for my marriage to fail. I didn't want people there who saw the whole thing as some kind of social event rather than something meaningful. So I said no. And once I said it out loud, it felt clear. We made the decision together. We wouldn't invite my parents, or my brother, or my aunt. It wasn't done out of revenge. It was done because I didn't want that energy around us on a day that was supposed to be about commitment and honesty. I knew it would cause problems. I just didn't realize how quickly or how badly. Invitations went out about a month later. Within 3 days, my phone started blowing up. First, it was my mother calling repeatedly. Then messages. Then my father. Then my brother. I didn't answer at first. I wasn't ready. Eventually, I picked up one of my father's calls. He didn't even start with a greeting. Just, "Is this some kind of mistake?" I said no. There was a long pause. Then he asked, "You're not inviting your own family to your wedding?" I said, "No, I'm not." He asked why, and for a moment, I considered lying, saying something vague about space or budget. But I didn't. I told him I heard what they said that night. Silence. Then he said, "You were listening to a private conversation." I said I wasn't trying to. I heard my name and stopped. And instead of apologizing, instead of even acknowledging what was said, he got defensive. He said things like, "People say things in private, and you're overreacting, and that wasn't meant for you to hear." That just made everything worse. I told him it wasn't just about hearing it. It was about the fact that they genuinely felt that way. He said, "You're throwing away your relationship with your family over one conversation." And I said, "No. I'm making a decision based on what that conversation revealed." We went back and forth like that for a while, but it went nowhere. My mother eventually called me crying, saying she didn't mean it like that she was just worried about me. My brother texted me saying I was being dramatic and hurting everyone over something I should have just ignored. Even extended family got involved. Messages, calls, people asking what's going on, telling me to be the bigger person. Now I'm sitting here, a few weeks away from my wedding, and it feels like everything is split in two. On one side, there's Elise, our friends, people who are genuinely excited for us. On the other side, there's my family who are angry, hurt, and acting like I've betrayed them. And I keep going back to that moment on the stairs, to the way my mother laughed, to the way my father talked about me like I was predictable in the worst way, to the fact that none of them believed in us. I don't know if I'm making the right decision. I just know that pretending I didn't hear it and standing there on my wedding day looking at them, knowing what they really think, feels worse than not having them there at all. Update: I didn't expect things to escalate as quickly as they did after I posted the invitations, but looking back now, I think this had been building for years and just needed a trigger. A few days after my last call with my father, my mother showed up at my apartment in Ghent unannounced. Elise was there when it happened. We were in the middle of dinner when the doorbell rang, and I remember thinking it was probably a delivery or one of our friends. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, I felt this immediate mix of guilt and frustration. She looked different, not in a dramatic way, just smaller somehow. Like the confidence she usually carries wasn't there. She asked if she could come in. I hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. Elise stayed in the kitchen at first, but you could tell she was listening. Not in a sneaky way, just because it was impossible not to hear. My mother didn't sit down right away. She just stood there, looking around like she was trying to figure out where she fit in the space. Then she started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that kept coming. She said she didn't understand how things had gotten to this point, that she felt like she was losing me, that she couldn't believe I would cut them out over one misunderstanding. I told her again that it wasn't just one misunderstanding, that what I heard wasn't ambiguous, it was clear. She tried to explain it differently this time. She said when she laughed, it wasn't because she thought my relationship would fail, but because she was nervous and didn't know how to respond to my aunt's question. But that didn't line up with everything else that was said. I asked her directly, "Do you believe Elise and I are going to last?" She didn't answer right away. That silence was louder than anything she could have said. Eventually, she said, "I just worry that you're very different people." And I said, "That's not the same as believing in us." At that point, Elise came into the living room. She didn't interrupt aggressively or anything, just walked in and sat next to me. My mother looked at her, and for a moment I thought maybe this would turn into something constructive. Like maybe they'd finally talk honestly. Instead, it got uncomfortable. My mother started saying things like, "I've always tried to be welcoming, and I've never done anything to hurt you." Elise stayed calm, but she didn't sugarcoat anything. She said, "You've been polite, but not welcoming. There's a difference." That seemed to hit a nerve. My mother asked what she meant, and Elise explained very clearly that she's always felt judged. Not openly criticized, but subtly dismissed. That every interaction felt like she was being evaluated against some invisible standard she could never meet. I sat there listening, realizing how much Elise had been holding in without telling me the full extent of it. My mother denied it at first, said it wasn't intentional, that she's just reserved. And maybe that's partly true. But intent doesn't really erase impact. The conversation went in circles for almost an hour. At one point, my mother said something that shifted everything again. She said, "We just want what's best for you." And I replied, "No, you want what you think is best for me." There was a long pause after that, because that's really what this has always been about. Not concern in the way she frames it, but control, expectations. A version of my life that fits their idea of what it should look like. Eventually, she asked me one last time to reconsider, to at least invite them, even if things weren't perfect. I told her I couldn't. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I didn't trust that they could be there in the right way. I didn't want to stand at the altar wondering who in the room actually believed in what we were doing. She nodded, but you could tell she didn't accept it. She just ran out of arguments. When she left, the apartment felt completely drained of energy. Elise and I didn't talk immediately. We just sat there for a while. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said, "This isn't just about the wedding. This is about the kind of life we're building." And she's right. Over the next couple of weeks, things with my family got quieter, but not better. The messages slowed down, but they didn't stop completely. My brother sent me a long text at one point saying I was fracturing the family and that I'd regret this later. My aunt tried a more emotional angle, saying my parents were heartbroken and that I was being unnecessarily cold. I didn't engage much. Not because I didn't care, but because every conversation just reset the same arguments. We went ahead with the wedding plans, and then about a week before the wedding, something unexpected happened. My brother showed up. No warning, just like my mother had done, but his approach was completely different. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't angry either. Just direct. We went for a walk outside because I didn't want to have that conversation in front of Elise again. He told me he understood why I was upset, but that I was taking it too far. That families say things in private all the time, and it doesn't mean they don't care. I asked him if he believed what was said. He hesitated, then said, I think there are concerns. Yeah, that honesty, at least, I respected more than denial. But it didn't change anything. I told him that concerns are one thing, but the way it was said, the dismissal, the lack of respect, that's what I couldn't ignore. He asked me if I was really okay with not having our parents at my wedding. I said no. Of course I'm not okay with it. It's not what I wanted. But wanting something and pretending it exists aren't the same thing. He didn't have a response to that. Before he left, he said, this is going to change things permanently, you know. And I said, I think things were already changed. I just didn't see it clearly before. The wedding is in a few days now. It's smaller than it would have been, quieter in a way, but it also feels more real. The people who are coming are there because they genuinely support us. There's no performance, no obligation. But I won't pretend it doesn't hurt. There's a part of me that still wishes things were different. That my family could have been the kind that shows up fully, without judgment or doubt. I don't know what happens after the wedding. I don't know if this distance becomes permanent, or if time softens things enough for some kind of relationship to rebuild. Right now, I'm just trying to focus on what's in front of me, on Elise, on the life we're choosing together, and on the fact that, for better or worse, this decision, like the wedding itself, is something I have to stand in fully, without looking back every 5 minutes wondering if I should have done it differently. Update: the wedding happened. I've been putting off writing this because I didn't really know how to explain how it felt without either oversimplifying it or making it sound more dramatic than it actually was. The truth is, it was both one of the best days of my life and one of the strangest emotional experiences I've ever had. The morning started quietly. No chaos, no huge crowd of people running around. Just a small group: Elise, a couple of her closest friends, and me getting ready in separate rooms of this old renovated townhouse we rented just outside the city. There was this calmness to it that I don't think would have been possible if my family had been involved. No tension, no underlying pressure, no one making comments or subtly trying to control things. Everything felt intentional, and yet there were moments where I felt the absence. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in small, almost invisible gaps. Like when I was getting dressed and realized there was no one from my side there to help me with my tie. Or when one of Elise's friends casually asked, is your family coming later? And then immediately looked uncomfortable when she remembered. I told myself to stay present, to focus on what was actually there, not what wasn't. The ceremony itself was small, maybe 25 people total, close friends, a few of Elise's relatives, people who have been part of our lives in a real, consistent way. When I saw Elise walking toward me, everything else kind of faded out. I know that sounds cliché, but it's the only way I can describe it. All the noise from the past months, the arguments, the messages, the second guessing, just stopped mattering for a while. We wrote our own vows, which I was initially hesitant about, but I'm glad we did. Hers were honest in a way that almost broke me a little. She talked about choosing each other, not just when it's easy, but when it's complicated, when it means making hard decisions that don't make everyone happy. I knew exactly what she was referring to without her having to say it directly. When it was my turn, I didn't mention my family or any of the conflict. I just focused on her, on us, on the life we're building. It felt right not to bring that shadow into that moment. There was one second, though, right after we exchanged rings, where my eyes instinctively scanned the crowd. I don't even know why. Maybe some part of me expected to see them there anyway, like they might have shown up last minute. They weren't. And that hit me harder than I expected. Not enough to ruin anything, but enough to leave a mark. The rest of the day was good. Genuinely good. People laughed, we ate, we danced in that awkward, slightly uncoordinated way small weddings always end up having. There was no forced energy, no obligation. Just people being there because they wanted to be. At one point in the evening, I stepped outside alone for a bit. Just needed a moment to breathe. That's when I checked my phone. I hadn't looked at it all day. There were a few messages. Most from friends who couldn't attend, sending congratulations. But there was also one from my mother. It was sent a few hours before the ceremony. It just said, I hope today is beautiful for you. I'm thinking of you. That was it. No guilt, no pressure, no attempt to reopen the argument. Just that. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know what to say. I went back inside, finished the evening, tried to stay in the moment. Later that night, after everything had quieted down and Elise had fallen asleep, I finally responded. I said, it was a good day. I hope you're okay. She replied about 10 minutes later, which told me she'd probably been staring at her phone all day too. She said, I'm glad it was good. I wish things were different, but I understand why they aren't. That was the first time anyone in my family had said something that felt even close to acknowledging my perspective without immediately pushing back against it. We didn't have a long conversation after that. Just a couple more messages, simple, careful. But something shifted. In the weeks since the wedding, things have been quieter, but in a different way than before. Not the heavy, hostile silence, but more like a distance that isn't constantly being poked at. I've spoken to my mother a few times since then. Short calls, nothing deep yet. We're kind of rebuilding from a very basic level, like two people who know each other well, but are trying to figure out how to interact again without triggering the same patterns. My father hasn't really engaged much. He's been present in the background of a couple of calls, but he hasn't addressed anything directly. That's not surprising. That's always been his way. My brother sent me a message a few days after the wedding. Just, I hope it went well. No apology, no argument. It's not much, but it's more neutral than before. I don't know what our relationship will look like long term. I don't know if they'll ever fully accept Elise in the way I need them to. And I don't know if I'll ever fully get past what I heard that night. But I do know this. I don't regret not inviting them. That's something I've thought about a lot, especially in the quiet moments after everything settled. I regret that it came to that. I regret that my family couldn't be the kind of support system I hoped they would be. I regret that there's now this fracture that might never fully heal. But I don't regret protecting that day, because the wedding we had, it was honest. It reflected who we actually are, not who anyone else expected us to be. There was no pretending, and I think that matters more than having a perfect family picture. Elise and I are settling into married life now, and it feels steady. Not dramatically different from before, but more grounded in a way that's hard to explain. Like we went through something that tested us before we even got to the starting line, and we chose each other anyway. I still think about that moment on the stairs sometimes, but it doesn't hit the same way anymore. It's not this sharp, painful thing. It's more like a turning point I can see clearly now, a moment where I stopped trying to fit into a version of my life that wasn't really mine. I don't know what the future looks like with my family, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm actually living my life on my own terms. Stories number 8. I told my ex-wife's husband I'm not switching weekends anymore just because he keeps booking over my custody time. I didn't think I'd ever be the kind of person posting something like this, but I'm at a point where I genuinely don't know if I'm being reasonable or if I've turned into the difficult one without realizing it. I'm 38, living in Ghent, and I share custody of my daughter, Elise, who's 9. Her mom, Sophie, and I divorced about 4 years ago. It wasn't explosive, no cheating or anything like that. We just didn't work anymore. It was hard, but we kept things as civil as possible, mostly because we both agreed Elise comes first. For the first couple of years, things were actually pretty smooth. We had a set schedule, alternating weekends, and we both stuck to it. If something came up, we'd talk swap days, figure it out. It felt like we were doing the good parenting thing people always talk about. Then about a year and a half ago, Sophie remarried, her husband, Lucas. At first, I had no issue with him. He seemed polite enough. Works in some kind of consulting job, travels a lot, dresses like he's always going to a meeting. Elise said he was okay, which, coming from a kid, is basically a neutral endorsement. The problems didn't start immediately. It was gradual. The first time was about a year ago. Sophie called me and said Lucas had booked a surprise weekend trip for them, and it happened to fall on one of her weekends with Elise. She asked if I could take Elise that weekend instead. I said yes. It didn't feel like a big deal. I got extra time with my daughter, and they got their trip. Everyone wins. Then it happened again. This time, it was a concert in Amsterdam. Apparently tickets were hard to get, and Lucas had bought them months in advance without checking the custody schedule. Sophie asked if we could swap weekends again. I hesitated, but I agreed. Again, more time with Elise, so I told myself it wasn't worth making an issue out of it. But then it kept happening. Not every month, but often enough that I started noticing a pattern. Trips, events, work things Lucas had planned, and somehow they kept overlapping with Sophie's custody time. And every time I was the one expected to adjust. At first, it was always framed nicely. Would you mind helping us out? Or it would really mean a lot. And I didn't want to be the difficult ex, so I said yes more often than I probably should have. But over time, it started to feel less like a favor and more like an expectation. The moment it really clicked for me was about 3 months ago. I had planned something special with Elise for my weekend. Nothing huge, just a day trip to Bruges, her favorite place. She loves the canals, the chocolate shops, all of it. I'd even taken a day off work to make it a proper weekend with her. 2 days before, Sophie called. Same tone, same request. Lucas had apparently booked a last-minute ski trip in Austria, and it overlapped with her upcoming weekend, which meant she wanted to swap with mine. I told her I couldn't. I explained I had plans with Elise, that I'd already arranged everything. There was this pause on the phone, and then she said, "Can't you just move it? She'll still enjoy it another weekend." That bothered me more than I expected. It wasn't just about the trip. It was the assumption that my time with my daughter was flexible, something that could be shifted around to accommodate their plans. I said no again, more firmly this time. She didn't argue much, but I could hear the irritation in her voice. She ended the call pretty quickly. Later that evening, I got a message from Lucas. That was new. We had barely interacted directly before. Communication was always between me and Sophie. His message was polite on the surface, but there was something underneath it. He wrote something like, "Hey, I hear there's a bit of a scheduling issue. I understand you have plans, but it would really help us out if you could be flexible this once." This once. That phrase actually made me laugh when I read it. I replied, keeping it civil, saying that I'd already made plans with Elise and wouldn't be able to switch this time. He responded almost immediately. "Well, in the future, it would be great if we could all work together a bit more. It's important for Elise to see cooperation between the adults in her life." That rubbed me the wrong way, because in my mind I had been cooperating, repeatedly. I didn't reply after that. I left it there. That weekend went ahead as planned, and Elise had an amazing time. She kept talking about the chocolate museum for days. But things changed after that. Sophie became colder. Not openly hostile, just distant. Communication became more formal, less friendly. Messages were shorter. There was less willingness on her side to adjust when I needed something. Then, about 2 weeks ago, it happened again. Another request to switch weekends. This time because Lucas had booked some kind of work retreat that apparently allowed spouses, and Sophie wanted to go. I didn't even hesitate this time. I said no. And I didn't wrap it in apologies or long explanations. I just said I wouldn't be switching weekends anymore unless it was something genuinely important or related to Elise. She didn't respond. Instead, Lucas messaged me again. This time, he was less polite. He said I was being rigid and making things unnecessarily difficult. That in modern families, flexibility is key. That I was putting my own preferences above what would make things smoother for everyone. That's when I finally snapped. I replied, and I'll admit I wasn't as diplomatic as before. I told him that my custody time with my daughter is not something he gets to schedule around his trips. That if he keeps booking things without checking, that's his problem, not mine. And that I'm not switching weekends anymore just because he assumes I will. I also told him that if he wants cooperation, it goes both ways, and so far it's felt pretty one-sided. He didn't reply after that. But Sophie did. She called me later that night, clearly upset. She said I had no right to speak to Lucas that way, that I was creating tension in their household, and that Elise would eventually feel it. I told her I wasn't trying to create tension, I was trying to set a boundary. She said I was being inflexible. I said I had been flexible for a year and it hadn't been appreciated. The call ended badly. Now things are strained, to say the least. We stick to the schedule, no more swapping. Communication is minimal and strictly about Elise. No friendliness left, and I keep wondering if I handled it wrong. Part of me feels justified. I was being taken for granted, and I finally said something. But another part of me wonders if I escalated things too much, especially with Lucas. Maybe I should have kept it between me and Sophie. Maybe I could have said it differently. I don't regret setting the boundary. I just don't know if the way I did it is going to make things harder for Elise in the long run. Update. It's been about 6 weeks since everything blew up, and I didn't expect things to shift as much as they have. Right after that last argument, things stayed cold. Not just awkward, but properly cold. Sophie and I only spoke when absolutely necessary, and even then it felt like emailing a colleague you don't like. Short, direct, no warmth at all. Elise picked up on it almost immediately. She didn't say anything at first, but I could tell. Kids notice tone more than words. She started asking small questions like, "Do you talk to Mum today?" Or "Are you coming to my school thing together?" Things she never used to worry about before. That part got to me more than anything else. About a week after the argument, there was a school event. Nothing major, just a small presentation day. Normally, Sophie and I would both show up, stand awkwardly for a bit, but still manage to be friendly enough for Elise's sake. This time was different. We both showed up, but we barely acknowledged each other. A quick nod, nothing more. Lucas was there too, standing next to Sophie like he belonged in that space, which I guess he does now. At one point, Elise ran up to the three of us, clearly excited, and started talking about her project. She was looking between us, waiting for some kind of shared reaction. Instead, it felt like three separate adults listening, not a group. I could see the confusion on her face, even if she didn't fully understand it. That night, after I dropped her back, she asked me something that stuck. "Did you and Mum have a fight?" I didn't want to drag her into it, so I just said, "We disagreed about something, but it's nothing you need to worry about." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. That's when I started questioning myself again. Not about the boundary itself, but about how everything around it had unfolded. A few days later, Sophie texted me. Not about scheduling, not about logistics. Just, we need to talk. Properly. We met at a cafe, neutral ground again. It was tense at first, but not explosive, more tired. Like both of us had been carrying this for weeks and were over it. She started by saying she didn't like how things had become. That it wasn't good for Elise, and that she didn't want us to turn into one of those co-parenting situations where everything is hostile. I agreed with that. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. She admitted that maybe they had been pushing too much. Not in those exact words, but close enough. She said Lucas is used to planning things spontaneously, booking trips or events without thinking too far ahead, and because I had agreed to swaps so many times before, they both kind of assumed it wouldn't be a problem. Hearing her say that felt validating, I guess, like I wasn't imagining it. But then she also said that the way I spoke to Lucas crossed a line. That part I didn't argue too hard. I told her honestly that I was frustrated, that it had built up over time, and that his message felt condescending. But I also admitted that I probably could have handled it better. She appreciated that, I think. Then we got into the actual issue. I explained, as calmly as I could, that I'm not against being flexible. If something important comes up, something genuinely unavoidable, I'll always consider it. But I don't want to feel like the default solution every time Lucas makes plans without checking. She nodded and said that was fair. But she also asked for something in return. She said if I need flexibility in the future, I should be open about it too, instead of sticking rigidly to the schedule just to prove a point. That made sense. We ended up agreeing on something that probably should have been clear from the start, that the custody schedule is the default, not a suggestion, and any changes have to be discussed in advance, not assumed. After that, things improved, but not instantly. The tension didn't disappear overnight, but it softened. Communication became a bit more normal again. Not friendly like before, but respectful. Which, honestly, is enough. The bigger surprise came about a week later. Lucas messaged me. I wasn't expecting that at all. His message was different this time. Less polished, more direct. He basically said that he didn't realize how often the schedule changes were happening from my perspective. That from his side, it felt occasional, not repetitive, and that he probably should have checked more carefully before booking things. Then he said he didn't appreciate the way I spoke to him, but he understood where it came from. It wasn't a full apology, but it was close enough. I replied, keeping it simple. I said I could have handled it better too, but that I needed him to respect the custody schedule going forward. He agreed. Since then, there haven't been any requests to switch weekends, not a single one. And strangely, that's made everything calmer. I think setting that boundary clearly, even if it got messy, actually fixed something that had been quietly building for a long time. Elise seems more relaxed again too. She's back to her usual self, not asking those careful questions anymore. Last weekend, we were sitting by the canal eating waffles, and she said, I like knowing when I'm with you and when I'm with Mum. It feels easier. That hit me. Because that's really what this was about, even if I didn't frame it that way at the start. Consistency for her. Not just convenience for the adults. I still think about whether I could have handled things differently. Maybe if I had set the boundary earlier, it wouldn't have escalated. Maybe if I had stayed calmer with Lucas, it wouldn't have created that spike in tension. But at the same time, I don't think anything would have changed if I had just kept saying yes. So yeah, things aren't perfect, but they're better. Final update? It's been about 4 months since my last update, and I think I finally have a clear picture of how everything settled. The short version is that things didn't just stabilize, they actually became better than they were before all of this started. Not perfect, but more balanced. For a while after that conversation with Sophie and the message from Lucas, everything stayed very controlled. We all stuck to the agreement. No last-minute changes, no assumptions. If something came up, it was asked properly, in advance, and with the understanding that no was a valid answer. And interestingly, once that expectation was clear, the requests almost disappeared entirely. There were maybe 2 situations over the past few months where Sophie asked to adjust something. Both times, she asked early, explained the situation clearly, and didn't pressure me at all. One of them I agreed to, the other I didn't. Neither turned into an issue. That alone changed the dynamic. But the bigger shift wasn't just logistical, it was how we interacted. There was one moment that kind of marked the turning point. It was Elise's birthday. We decided to do a small joint celebration. Nothing big, just a lunch at a restaurant in the city with a few close family members. I was honestly a bit nervous going into it because it was the first time in months we'd all be in the same space without it being a quick school event. Sophie was there, Lucas was there, and for the first time in a while it didn't feel tense. Not warm exactly, but normal. At one point, Elise dragged the 3 of us into a photo together. Me, Sophie, and Lucas. We all kind of laughed awkwardly, but we did it. After the photo, Lucas made a small comment, something like, I think this is the most organized we've all been in a while. It wasn't sarcastic, just a simple observation. I said, yeah, turns out planning ahead works. He smiled a bit at that. Not a big moment, but it felt like an acknowledgement of everything that had happened without needing to spell it out. Later that day, Sophie and I ended up talking for a few minutes alone while Elise was opening gifts. She told me she appreciated that I held my ground, even if she didn't like how it happened at the time. She said it forced them to actually respect the schedule instead of treating it like something flexible by default. That meant more to me than I expected, because for a long time, I felt like I had to either be the easy one or the difficult one. And it turns out there's a middle ground, but sometimes you only get there by pushing back. I also apologized again for how I spoke to Lucas back then. Not in a dramatic way, just acknowledging that I let frustration get the better of me. She said she already knew that. And that was kind of it. No big emotional resolution, just a quiet understanding. As for Lucas, things are fine. We're not friends, but we're not at odds either. We've had a few direct conversations since then, all straightforward, no tension. He checks the schedule now. Actually checks it. And once or twice, he even reached out in advance to make sure something wouldn't conflict before booking anything. That alone tells me everything I need to know. Elise, though, is where I've seen the biggest difference. She's more settled, more predictable in her routines. She knows exactly when she's with me and when she's with her mom, and there's no last-minute confusion or changes. A few weeks ago, she said something that really stayed with me. We were walking back from school, and she said, "I like it better now." Before it felt like plans kept changing, but now it's easier to know what's happening. That was the moment it fully clicked for me. I had been thinking about this whole situation in terms of fairness between adults, respect, boundaries, all of that. But for her, it was much simpler. Stability. That's what she needed. And ironically, the thing that caused all the conflict ended up creating that stability once it was handled properly. I've also had time to reflect on my own part in everything. I don't think I was wrong to set the boundary. In fact, I think it was necessary. But I do think I let it build for too long before addressing it. By the time I finally said something, it came out sharper than it needed to. If I had spoken up earlier, calmly, it might have avoided that spike in tension. At the same time, I've accepted that sometimes people don't really hear you until you stop accommodating them. That's not ideal, but it's real. So no, I don't think I was wrong for refusing to switch weekends anymore. And I don't think I was wrong for standing firm when Lucas tried to push it. But I also understand now that how you say something can shape everything that comes after. If there's one thing I've taken from all of this, it's that boundaries only work if they're clear and consistent. Not occasional, not dependent on mood, but steady. And once they're there, people adjust. Right now, things feel settled. Not perfect, not overly friendly, but respectful and predictable. And for our situation, that's probably the best outcome I could have hoped for. Stories number 9. I don't know why I thought honesty would be the mature thing to do this time. Maybe because I'm 29 and I keep telling myself I should handle things like an adult, communicate clearly, give closure, all that. But after what happened, I genuinely think I was safer just disappearing. I live in Amsterdam, and I met him about 3 months ago through friends at a small birthday gathering. He was charming in that very specific way, attentive, quick with jokes, the kind of person who makes you feel like you're the only one in the room when he talks to you. We exchanged numbers, started texting, and within a week we were going on dates. At first, everything felt easy. He planned things, remembered little details I mentioned, and was very expressive about liking me. It felt refreshing compared to the usual half-interested, low-effort dating I'd gotten used to. But pretty quickly, I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't anything huge at the beginning, just small moments where something felt off. Like when I told him I needed a quiet night because I had an early meeting the next day, and he kept pushing for just one drink, then just 30 minutes, then I'm already nearby. It didn't feel like a suggestion, it felt like pressure wrapped in charm. Or the way he'd make little comments disguised as jokes. Like if I didn't reply for a few hours, he'd say something like, "Wow, ignoring me already?" That didn't take long. He'd laugh after, but it always left me feeling like I had to justify myself. I tried to brush it off at first. Everyone has quirks, right? But it kept building. One night, we were out with some of his friends in Rotterdam, and he got noticeably irritated when I was talking to one of his friends about work. Nothing inappropriate, just a normal conversation. On the way back, he asked me why I was trying so hard to impress his friend. I was genuinely confused. I told him I was just talking. He said, "You don't act like that with me." That was the first time I felt that tight feeling in my chest, the kind that tells you something isn't right. After that, I started paying more attention instead of dismissing things. And once I did, I couldn't unsee it. He needed constant reassurance. If I didn't respond fast enough, he'd double text. If I said I was busy, he'd question what I was doing. If I disagreed with him, even on small things, he'd turn it into a bigger issue about respect or being on the same page. I realized I was starting to adjust my behavior just to avoid reactions. That's when I knew I needed to end it. But instead of just fading out or blocking him like I've done in the past, I thought I'd do the right thing. I thought I'd be honest, clear, and respectful. So I invited him for coffee a few days ago and told him I didn't think we were a good match. At first, he seemed calm. He asked why, and I told him gently. I said I felt pressured sometimes, that I didn't feel fully comfortable being myself, and that I think we want different things emotionally. There was a pause, and then he smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. He said, "So you're saying I'm the problem?" I immediately clarified that I wasn't blaming him as a person, just explaining how I felt in the dynamic. That's when everything flipped. He started saying I was too sensitive, that I was misinterpreting his behavior, that I clearly have issues with communication. He said most people would appreciate someone who shows that much interest. Then he went further. He said, "Honestly, this feels like you're projecting. Maybe you're just not used to someone actually caring." I was sitting there thinking, what is happening? I tried again to stay calm and explain that regardless of intention, it didn't feel good to me, that I'm allowed to decide what works for me. That's when he went full defensive. He accused me of leading him on, said I wasted his time. Then, somehow, it turned into him saying I was the one who wasn't consistent, that I gave mixed signals, that I made him feel insecure. It was like everything I brought up got flipped back onto me. At one point, I actually started questioning myself, like, did I somehow cause this? Was I unclear? And then I caught myself. Because that's exactly what was happening. He was twisting everything to avoid taking any accountability. I'd never experienced that so clearly before. I've heard the term DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender, but I didn't realize how disorienting it feels when you're in it. By the end of the conversation, I felt exhausted. Not sad, not even angry, just drained. I told him I didn't want to continue the discussion and that my decision wasn't changing. He rolled his eyes and said, "Of course. Easier to run away than work on your issues." That was the moment something just shut off in me. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just said goodbye and left. Since then, he sent a few messages, some passive-aggressive, some acting like nothing happened, one even saying, "I hope you figure out whatever is going on with you." I haven't replied. And honestly, I don't think I will. I keep replaying the conversation in my head, not because I miss him, because I'm frustrated with myself for thinking honesty would lead to a respectful ending. Instead, it just gave him an opportunity to twist things and make me doubt myself. So now I'm seriously thinking, what's the point? Why explain? Why open yourself up to that? Part of me feels like ghosting is rude, but another part of me feels like protecting your peace is more important than giving someone closure they'll just weaponize. I don't know. All I know is I went in trying to do the mature thing and walked out feeling like I needed to defend my own reality. And I never want to feel like that again. Update. I didn't expect things to continue after I decided not to reply, but they did, and in a way that honestly made everything a lot clearer for me. For the first 2 days after that conversation, I ignored his messages. They started off almost normal, like nothing had happened. He sent me a meme, then a "how's your day going?" as if we hadn't just had a breakup conversation where he basically blamed me for everything. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. He sent, "So you're just going to ignore me now?" Then a few hours later, "This is exactly what I meant about your communication issues." I still didn't reply. At that point, I felt like anything I said would just pull me back into that same cycle. The next morning, I woke up to a long message. It started with, "I've been thinking, and I think we both handled things badly." For a second, I thought maybe this was him taking some accountability. But as I kept reading, it became obvious it wasn't that at all. He said he reacted strongly because I attacked his character, that I framed him as controlling when he was just showing interest. Then he went on about how I should have communicated my needs better earlier and how my lack of consistency created confusion for him. So basically, it was still my fault, just phrased more calmly. What really got to me was the ending. He wrote, "I'm willing to move past this if you can acknowledge your part and approach things more maturely." That sentence genuinely made me sit there and stare at my phone, because it hit me that he didn't even see the breakup as real. In his mind, this was just a disagreement I needed to fix by admitting I was wrong. I didn't reply to that either. A few hours later, he tried calling me. I declined. Then he called again. And again. That's when I finally sent a message, short, clear, and probably the last thing I'll ever say to him. I told him that my decision wasn't up for discussion, that I didn't want further contact, and that I wished him well. I tried to keep it neutral. No accusations, no explanations. His response came almost immediately, and it was like flipping a switch. He went from calm to angry within seconds. He said I was cold, that I clearly never cared, that I used him for attention. Then he said something like, "You'll regret this when you realize how hard it is to find someone who actually puts in effort." That one almost made me laugh, but not in a funny way. More like disbelief. I didn't engage. I just blocked him after that. I thought that would be the end of it. But then yesterday, I got a message from a mutual acquaintance, the same person whose birthday party we met at. She asked me if everything was okay between us because he had been telling people that I suddenly turned on him and that I have a pattern of pushing people away. That part actually upset me more than anything he said directly to me, not because I care what he thinks, but because now he was shaping a narrative about me to other people. I didn't go into details with her. I just said we weren't compatible and left it at that. She didn't push, which I appreciated, but it made me realize something important. If I had ghosted him from the start, he probably would have still created his own version of events. But at least I wouldn't have sat through that conversation, second, guessed myself, and given him material to twist. I've been thinking a lot about that moment in the cafe, how I kept trying to explain, clarify, soften my words, as if there was a version of the conversation that would make him understand. There wasn't, because the issue wasn't miscommunication. It was how he processes accountability, and I think that's the part I didn't fully understand before. Now that a few days have passed, I don't feel shaken anymore. I actually feel more grounded. That confusion I felt during the conversation, it's gone. I can see it clearly now. The pressure, the subtle guilt, the way he reframed everything, it was all there from the beginning. I just kept minimizing it because nothing was bad enough on its own. Until it was. I also don't feel guilty anymore for blocking him. If anything, I wish I trusted my instincts earlier instead of trying to be fair and mature in a situation where the other person wasn't operating in good faith. I'm not saying I'll ghost everyone from now on, but I think I've learned that not everyone is owed an explanation, especially if they've already shown they don't respect your boundaries. And honestly, I feel a lot more at peace now than I did when I was trying to explain myself. Final update, I didn't think I'd come back to write this, but enough has happened over the past couple of weeks that it feels like a proper ending, at least for me. After I blocked him, things were quiet for a few days. And I mean actually quiet. No messages, no calls, no secondhand comments getting back to me. For the first time since that cafe conversation, I felt like my head wasn't constantly replaying everything. I started getting back into my normal routine here in Amsterdam, work, seeing friends, even just small things like going for walks without checking my phone. It sounds minor, but I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until that tension was gone. Then, about a week later, something unexpected happened. I got an email from him. Not a message, an actual long email. At first, I just stared at it. I had already blocked him everywhere else, so I guess this was his workaround. I debated not opening it at all, but curiosity got the better of me. It started very differently from his previous messages. He said he'd had time to think and that he wanted to apologize for how he reacted during our conversation. He admitted he got defensive and said things he shouldn't have. For a moment, I felt that familiar pull, that tiny voice saying, maybe this is the accountability you were hoping for. But then I kept reading, because after the apology, it slowly shifted. He started explaining why he reacted that way, how he felt caught off guard, how my words triggered insecurity, how he felt like he was being judged unfairly. And then, almost subtly, it turned into this idea that if I had approached the conversation differently, if I had been more reassuring, more patient, then things wouldn't have escalated. So even in his apology, there was still that underlying message. This could have gone better if you had done things differently. And that's when it really clicked for me. It wasn't a real apology. It was a softer version of the same pattern. Old me would have responded. I know that for a fact. I would have tried to acknowledge his feelings, maybe even apologize for my part, and somehow end up back in a conversation that goes in circles. But I didn't. I closed the email and I didn't reply. Not out of anger, not to punish him, but because I finally understood something I didn't before. Closure doesn't come from the other person agreeing with you or admitting fault. It comes from you deciding you're done engaging. A couple of days after that, I ran into the mutual acquaintance again, the one who had messaged me earlier. We ended up talking a bit more openly this time. I didn't go into every detail, but I was more honest about why things ended. She told me, very casually, that she wasn't surprised. Apparently, I'm not the first person he's had this kind of dynamic with. She didn't say it in a dramatic way, just more like a known pattern. That didn't make me feel better or worse, just validated. It also made me realize how easy it is to internalize something that was never really about you. I've spent the past week reflecting on all of this, and the biggest thing I've taken away isn't about him, it's about me. About why I felt the need to explain so much in the first place. I think I've always believed that if you communicate clearly enough, kindly enough, reasonably enough, then the other person will meet you there. But that only works when both people are willing to take responsibility. And if they're not, no amount of explaining will fix it. What I see now is that my mistake wasn't telling him the truth. The truth itself was fine. It was giving him repeated chances to reinterpret it, argue it, and turn it back on me. I kept engaging past the point where I already had my answer. That's the part I won't repeat. I don't think I'll become someone who ghosts without thought or disappears on people who genuinely deserve respect. But I also won't feel obligated to justify my boundaries to someone who's already shown they don't respect them. There's a difference between being kind and overexposing yourself to someone who will use that openness against you. And I finally understand that now. I don't feel angry anymore. I don't even feel hurt. If anything, I feel steady. like I trust myself a bit more than I did before. And honestly, that feels like a better ending than anything he could have said to me. Stories number 10. I don't know if I went too far or if I just finally said something that had been building up for years. I'm 31, getting married in a few months in Porto, where my fiance, Tiago, 34, is from. I grew up in Rotterdam with my mom, Elise, and my dad, Henrik. My parents split when I was 8, and after that, my dad slowly just disappeared from my life. Not all at once. It was gradual, which somehow made it worse. At first, it was every other weekend visits, then once a month, then birthdays only, then not even that unless my mom reminded him. By the time I was around 14, I basically stopped expecting anything from him. He didn't move far either. He was still in the Netherlands, about an hour away. It wasn't distance, it was choice. Meanwhile, my mom did everything. She worked 2 jobs for a while, made sure I stayed in school, helped me through some really rough teenage years. I had anxiety issues, struggled with exams, and there were nights where I just break down over nothing and everything at once. She was there for all of it. My dad wasn't. He missed my school graduation, said he had work obligations. He forgot my 18th birthday entirely. I remember sitting there that night, staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came. After that, something in me just shut off when it came to him. We didn't fully cut contact, but it became polite distance. Occasional messages, the odd coffee maybe once or twice a year. Surface level conversations, no real relationship. Fast forward to now, I moved to Portugal 3 years ago for work, met Tiago, and everything in my life finally feels stable, safe. Like I actually built something for myself. When we got engaged, I told my mom first. She cried, obviously, happy tears. The kind that come from actually being part of someone's life. I hesitated before telling my dad, but I did eventually. He responded with a voice message saying how proud he was of me, how excited he was, how he always knew I'd find someone amazing. That felt strange to hear. Then things started to shift. He began messaging more, asking about wedding plans, venues, guest lists. At first, I thought maybe he was trying to reconnect, which I was cautiously open to. But then it started feeling less like reconnecting and more like inserting himself. He asked if he'd be walking me down the aisle. I didn't respond right away, because the truth is I had never even considered that. In my mind, if anyone was going to walk me down the aisle, it would be my mum. Or honestly, I'd walk alone. I eventually told him I hadn't decided yet. He didn't push, but a few days later he sent me this long message about how much that moment would mean to him, about how he's dreamed of it, how emotional it would be, how he'd probably cry. And that's where something in me snapped a little. Because all I could think was, where were those emotions when I actually needed a father? I tried to ignore it, but it kept coming up. He'd mentioned the wedding in this almost sentimental way, talking about his little girl getting married, like he had been there through my life. Then about 2 weeks ago, he came to Porto to visit. We met for dinner, just the two of us. It started off fine, catching up, small talk. But eventually, he brought it up again. He said he couldn't wait for the wedding, that it was going to be one of the most emotional days of his life. He even laughed a little and said, I'm definitely going to cry when I see you walking down the aisle. And I don't know what happened, but I just couldn't hold it in anymore. I told him, very calmly at first, you don't get to cry about that. He looked confused, like he genuinely didn't understand what I meant, so I explained. I told him that he doesn't get to show up for the beautiful moments when he wasn't there for the hard ones, that he wasn't there when I was struggling in school, when I had panic attacks, when I needed support, that he didn't even do the bare minimum most of the time. I said, you don't get to act like this is your emotional milestone when you didn't help me get here? The table went completely silent. He looked hurt, which I expected, but also shocked, like he had never really thought about it that way. He tried to defend himself at first, said he didn't realize how bad things were, that my mom handled things well, that he thought giving space was the right thing. That made me angrier. I told him giving space isn't the same as disappearing. That being a parent isn't something you can opt in and out of depending on convenience. Then I said the part that's been stuck in my head ever since. I told him that if he cries at my wedding, it won't be because of love or pride, it'll be because of guilt. That's when he went quiet. We finished dinner after that, but it was awkward, heavy. When we said goodbye, he hugged me, but it felt different, tense. Since then, he's barely messaged me. My mom thinks I was honest, but maybe too harsh. Tiago says he understands why I said it, but asked if I actually wanted to rebuild anything with my dad, or if I was just pushing him away completely. And I honestly don't know, because part of me does feel bad. I didn't need to say it like that. I could have been gentler. But another part of me feels like I've been gentle for years. Quiet, understanding, making excuses for him. And this was the first time I actually said what it felt like growing up with him not being there. Now I keep wondering if I crossed a line. Not about the truth itself, but the way I said it. He hasn't asked again about walking me down the aisle. He hasn't mentioned the wedding at all, actually. And I don't know if I just set a boundary or burned whatever was left of that relationship. Update. It's been about a month since that dinner, and things didn't stay quiet for as long as I thought they would. For the first 2 weeks after I posted, my dad barely said anything. Just one short message a few days after asking if I got home safe that night. I replied yes, and that was it. No mention of what I said, no attempt to revisit it. It felt like everything I'd said just hung there unresolved. During that time, I kept going back and forth in my head. Some days I felt relieved, like I had finally said what needed to be said. Other days I felt like I'd gone too far, like I had taken years of frustration and dropped it all on him in one moment without warning. Then he sent me a long message. I remember staring at it for a while before opening it, because I genuinely didn't know what I was about to read, whether it would be defensive, angry, or something else entirely. It wasn't what I expected. He didn't argue with anything I said. He didn't try to justify himself in the way he had at dinner. Instead, he said that what I told him had been painful, but not unfair. That line stuck with me. He admitted that after the divorce, he withdrew more than he should have. That he convinced himself I was doing fine because my mum was strong and present. That it was easier to believe I didn't need him than to face the possibility that he was failing as a father. He said something else that I didn't know how to process at first. He wrote that sometimes he avoided reaching out because he felt like it was already too late, like I had grown up without him and there was no place for him anymore. So instead of trying and risking rejection, he chose distance. Reading that made me feel conflicted, because part of me understood it in a very human way. Fear, guilt, avoidance, it all made sense. But another part of me kept thinking, you were the parent? It wasn't my job to make it easier for you to show up. He also addressed what I said about the wedding. He told me that when he said he would cry, he didn't mean it as some claim over my life or my journey. He said it would be emotional for him because he knows he missed so much, and seeing me now would make that reality impossible to ignore. Then he said, maybe you're right. Maybe it would be guilt. That line hit harder than anything else. At the end of the message, he said he wasn't going to assume anything about the wedding anymore, that he wouldn't ask about walking me down the aisle again, that he would come if I still wanted him there, and if not, he would respect that too. No pressure. No expectations. Just that. I didn't reply right away. I needed time to think, because for the first time it felt like he was actually being honest, not just saying what he thought he was supposed to say, but actually acknowledging things without trying to smooth them over. A few days later, we had a call. It was awkward at first. There were long pauses, moments where neither of us knew what to say. But it didn't feel tense in the same way as before. More like two people trying to figure out how to talk after years of not really doing it properly. I told him that I appreciated the message, that I meant what I said at dinner, but that I didn't say it to hurt him. I said it because I've been carrying those feelings for a long time. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue. Just listened. Then he apologized, not in a vague way. Not I'm sorry if you felt that way. He said, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when you needed me. I should have been, and I wasn't. I don't think I realized how much I needed to hear that until that moment. I didn't suddenly forgive everything. It wasn't like that, but it shifted something. We talked for almost 2 hours. About small things, about the past, about things we both remembered differently. There were still gaps, still things left unsaid, but it felt like the first real conversation we've had in years. The wedding topic came up again, but differently this time. He said he understands if I don't want him to walk me down the aisle, that he hasn't earned that role, but he asked if there was any way he could still be part of the day in a way that felt right to me. That question has been sitting with me ever since, because I realized I had been thinking in very all or nothing terms. Either he gets the full father role or nothing at all, but maybe there's something in between. I talked about it a lot with Tiago. He's been incredibly patient through all of this. He told me that this isn't about what's traditionally right, it's about what feels honest to me. That I don't owe anyone a symbolic gesture that doesn't match my reality, but I also don't have to shut someone out completely if I don't want to. So here's where things are now. My mom is still the one walking me down the aisle. That hasn't changed, and I feel completely at peace with that decision. But I told my dad that I do want him at the wedding. And more than that, I asked if he'd be willing to do a reading during the ceremony. Something small but meaningful. A way for him to be present without pretending he played a role he didn't. He got quiet when I suggested it. Then he said yes. He sounded emotional, not in the same performative way that used to bother me, but something quieter, more restrained. Since then, we've been talking more. Not constantly, not perfectly, but consistently. It still feels new and a bit fragile, like we're both careful not to push too hard or expect too much. I don't know what our relationship will look like long term. I'm not suddenly rewriting the past or pretending everything is fixed. But I also don't feel like I destroyed anything anymore. If anything, that conversation, the one I thought might have burned everything down, actually forced something real to finally exist between us. And as uncomfortable as it was, I think it needed to happen exactly the way it did. Final update. The wedding already happened. I waited until everything settled, not just the day itself, but the emotions after, before writing this, because I wanted to understand how I actually felt about all of it. It was in Porto, like we planned. Small, warm, close friends and family, the kind of wedding that feels more like a gathering than a performance. The morning of, I wasn't even that nervous about getting married. I was nervous about everything around it. About my parents being in the same space, about whether things would feel tense, about whether I would regret any of the decisions I made. But it didn't unfold the way I feared. My mum was with me while I was getting ready. She helped me with my dress, fixed my hair when I kept fidgeting, kept making little jokes to calm me down. At one point, she just looked at me and teared up, and I realized she wasn't just emotional about the wedding, she was emotional about all the years that led to it, all the things she carried alone. That moment grounded me. My dad arrived a bit earlier than most guests. I saw him from a distance at first, standing near the entrance, looking slightly out of place, like he didn't quite know where to stand or what to do with himself. It was strange to see him like that, not distant, not absent, but uncertain. He didn't come rushing over. He waited until I approached him. When I did, he just said, "You look beautiful." No big speech, no attempt to make about himself. Just that. And then he hugged me, carefully, like he wasn't sure if it was welcome. It didn't feel forced. The ceremony itself is something I don't think I'll ever forget. I walked down the aisle with my mum, and I didn't feel like anything was missing. If anything, it felt completely right. There was no part of me wishing it had been different, no second guessing in that moment. I did glance over once, though just briefly. My dad was watching. He wasn't crying in a dramatic way, no big visible breakdown like he used to talk about. But his eyes were red and he looked still, like he was holding everything in, not making it about him. And that mattered more than I expected. The reading happened about halfway through the ceremony. He stood up, a little nervous, holding the paper like he didn't trust his hands not to shake. His voice wavered at first, but he got through it. It wasn't long. Just a passage about love being something you choose every day, something you show up for even when it's hard. I remember that line very clearly. Love is not just a feeling, it's a commitment to be present. I don't know if he chose that intentionally because of everything, but it felt honest. There was a moment where his voice almost broke, but he steadied himself and kept going. No performance. No trying to turn it into something bigger. Just showing up. After the ceremony, during the reception, something small happened that I think says more than anything else. There was a father-daughter dance planned in the original schedule. I had quietly removed it weeks before, without making a big announcement. I didn't know if he noticed. At one point, he came over to me while people were dancing and said, "I saw that wasn't on the list. That's okay." No guilt. No pressure. No attempt to change it in the moment. Just acceptance. And then he added, "I'm just happy I got to be here." That was it. I think that's when I finally let go of the last bit of tension I was holding. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like he was trying to claim something he hadn't earned. He wasn't trying to rewrite the past or insert himself into moments that didn't belong to him. He was just there. Present. After the wedding, things didn't suddenly become perfect or close or easy. We're not magically a normal father and daughter. We still don't have that kind of history, and I don't think we ever will. But we have something real now. We talk more regularly. Sometimes it's just small things, how work is going, random updates, nothing deep. Sometimes it's a bit more. It still feels like we're building something from the ground up, slowly, carefully. And I've made peace with that. I don't need him to be the father he wasn't. I don't need to force a version of the relationship that doesn't exist. What I needed was acknowledgement, honesty, effort. And now at least I have that. Looking back at everything, the dinner, the argument, the words I said that night, I don't regret them anymore. They were harsh, yes. Maybe harsher than they needed to be. But they were also true. And without that moment, I don't think anything that followed would have happened. We would have stayed in that polite, distant version of a relationship forever. Instead, something changed. Not into something perfect, but into something honest. And that, for me, was enough. Stories number 11, I didn't suspect an affair, I suspected something worse, that he had already replaced me emotionally and I was the only one still pretending we were fine. I'm 34, my husband Daniel is 37, and we live in Vienna. We've been married for 6 years, together for almost 10. For most of that time, I would have told anyone we had a solid relationship. Not perfect, but stable. We communicated, we respected each other, we had routines that felt safe. At least that's what I believed. This started about 4 months ago, and at first it didn't look like anything serious. Daniel mentioned a new colleague at work. Her name is Clara. He works in a consulting firm, and apparently she joined his team on a long-term project. The way he talked about her at the beginning was completely normal. "She's sharp," he said one evening over dinner. really quick with analysis. Makes the meetings less painful. I remember smiling and saying something like, sounds like a good addition. And that should have been it. But then her name started coming up more often. At first, it was still work related. A presentation they worked on together, a client meeting that went well, a problem she helped solve. I didn't think much of it because honestly, I talk about people from my job too. But then the tone shifted, and it was subtle enough that I almost missed it. He started mentioning things about her that weren't work related. She's been having a rough time lately. Her boyfriend sounds like an idiot. She's actually really easy to talk to. That last one stuck with me for some reason. Easy to talk to. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. Then the late night started. Daniel has always worked late occasionally. It's part of his job, but this felt different. He would be on his phone more, even when he was home. Not in a secretive way exactly, but absorbed. I'd be sitting next to him on the couch, and he'd be typing, smiling slightly at something, then locking his phone when he noticed me looking. Again, nothing concrete. Nothing you can point to and say, this is wrong. Just a feeling? One night, I woke up around 1:30 a.m. and noticed he wasn't in bed. I found him in the living room, lights dimmed, sitting on the couch with his phone. Everything okay? I asked, half asleep. He looked up a bit startled. Yeah, just couldn't sleep. Who are you texting? He hesitated for just a second. Clara, he said. She's going through some stuff. That was the first time he said her name in that context, late at night, in the dark, when he thought I was asleep. I didn't react much then. I just nodded and went back to bed, but something settled in my chest after that, because I've had male colleagues, I've had friendly conversations, but I've never been up at 1:30 a.m., having deep talks with them while my partner slept in the other room. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. Late, night messages. Occasional calls that he would take in the other room. Not always, but enough that it started to feel intentional. I tried to approach it calmly at first. One evening, I said, you and Clara seem to be talking a lot lately. He shrugged. Yeah. She just needs someone to talk to. Work's stressful, her personal life is a mess, and you're that someone. I guess, he said. I don't mind, it's just talking. Just talking? That phrase started to irritate me more than it should have, because it minimized something that felt bigger. I'm not saying you can't talk to her, I said carefully. It's a lot. And it's late. It feels a bit intense. He frowned. You're overthinking it, he said. It's not like that. Not like what? I didn't even accuse him of anything. That was the beginning of our arguments. They weren't explosive, but they kept happening. I'd bring it up, he'd dismiss it. I'd try to explain how it made me feel, he'd tell me I was being insecure, and the more he said that, the more I started doubting myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this is what normal adult friendships look like. Maybe I was projecting something that wasn't there. But then things escalated again. One Friday night, we had plans to watch a film together. It was something small, but we hadn't spent much time together that week, so I was looking forward to it. He got a message around 9 p.m. I saw his face change slightly when he read it. What is it? I asked. It's Clara, he said. She's not doing well. I think I should call her. I just stared at him. Now, yeah, he said. It might be important. And what about our plans? We can watch the film later, he said. This feels more urgent. That sentence felt like a punch to the chest. This feels more urgent. Her feelings, her problems, her late night crisis. More urgent than time with me. Daniel, I said slowly, this is exactly what I've been talking about. He sighed, already frustrated. She needs someone right now. And what am I? I asked. Because I'm right here. You're making this into something it's not, he said. I'm just trying to help a friend, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like I was being pushed aside for someone else's emotional needs. He went into the other room and called her anyway. I sat there alone, staring at a paused movie screen, feeling ridiculous. He stayed on the call for over an hour. When he came back, I didn't even want to talk anymore. That night, something shifted in me. It wasn't just jealousy. It was something deeper, like I was slowly being replaced in a role I didn't even realize was up for competition. Over the next week, I paid more attention. I noticed how quickly he responded to her messages compared to mine, how he seemed more engaged talking about her day than asking about mine, how he would smile at his phone in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. And the worst part? There was still no physical cheating, no clear betrayal you could point to. Just emotional intimacy that didn't belong to me anymore. I reached my breaking point 2 nights ago. It was almost 2 a.m., and once again he was in the living room talking quietly on the phone. I didn't even feel angry walking in. Just done. Is that her? I asked. He looked at me, annoyed this time. Yes. What do you want me to do? Hang up on her? Yes, I said. He blinked, clearly not expecting that. Excuse me. I want you to hang up, I repeated, and come to bed with your wife. He shook his head. I'm not going to do that. She's upset. And I'm not. I said, my voice finally breaking. Do you even see what this is doing to me? He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. You're making me choose between being a decent person and... No, I cut him off. I'm asking you to choose between your marriage and whatever this is. The room went very quiet. He ended the call then, but not because he agreed, because the tension had gotten too obvious to ignore. What do you mean, whatever this is? He asked. I mean this, I said, gesturing between us. These late night talks, this emotional dependency, this constant prioritizing of her over me. I'm not prioritizing her, he said immediately. You are, I said. You just don't want to admit it. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Nothing is happening, he said finally. Something is happening, I replied. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. Yes. He looked tired now, like this conversation was exhausting him. So what do you want? He asked. And that's when I said it. I want you to choose, I said. It's her or me. As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt how heavy they were. I've never given an ultimatum in my life. I've always thought they were manipulative, unhealthy. But I didn't know what else to do, because asking nicely hadn't worked. Explaining my feelings hadn't worked. Waiting hadn't worked. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. You're being unreasonable? He said maybe, I replied. But I'm also being honest. He didn't answer. He just went quiet, like he needed time to think. And that's where we are now. We're still in the same apartment, but it feels different. Distant, tense. Like something is about to break and neither of us knows exactly how. He hasn't said he'll stop talking to her. He hasn't said he won't. And I'm left here wondering if I crossed a line by forcing that choice, or if the real problem is that he made me feel like I had to. Update. The silence after that night was worse than any argument we'd had before. Not the kind of silence where you both cool off and then talk things through. This was different. It felt like we were both waiting for the other person to make the next move, but neither of us knew what that move should be. The next morning, Daniel left for work earlier than usual. No goodbye kiss, no we'll talk later, nothing. Just a quiet exit that felt intentional. I stayed home longer than I needed to before going to work myself, sitting at the kitchen table, replaying everything I'd said. It's her or me. The sentence kept echoing in my head, and part of me hated that I had said it like that. It sounded harsh, controlling even. But another part of me kept coming back to the same thought. I didn't create the situation, I reacted to it. That distinction started to matter more the more I thought about it. He didn't text me all day. Not a single message. Normally, even on busy days, we'd check in at least once or twice. How's your day going? A quick update, something small. But that day? Nothing. And I knew he was still talking to her. That's what made it worse. It wasn't just that he needed time to think. It was that I wasn't the person he turned to while thinking. When I got home that evening, he was already there, sitting on the couch. Phone in his hand? Of course. I stood in the doorway for a second, just looking at him, trying to read his expression. He looked tired again, but not conflicted in the way I expected. More resigned. We need to talk, I said. He nodded slowly and put his phone down. Not face down this time, just down. That felt like a small but noticeable change. I've been thinking about what you said, he started. So have I replied. There was a pause. I don't think it's fair for you to ask me to cut someone off like that, he said. Especially when I haven't done anything wrong. That sentence hit exactly where I expected it to. You really believe that? I asked. Yes, he said. I haven't cheated. I haven't lied to you about anything major. I've just been there for someone who needed support. And you don't see how that's affected us. I asked. I think you've let it affect you more than it should, he said carefully. That careful tone, like he was trying not to provoke me, somehow made it worse. So this is still about me overreacting? I said. I didn't say that, he replied quickly. I just think you're interpreting things in a way that makes it bigger than it is. I felt that familiar frustration rising again, but this time it was mixed with something else. Clarity, okay? I said, nodding slowly. Let's say you're right. Let's say nothing is happening. Then answer me this honestly. He waited. If I was the one staying up until 2 a.m., talking to a male coworker about his personal problems, taking calls in the middle of the night, prioritizing him over our time together, would you be completely fine with that? He didn't answer immediately. That hesitation said everything. That's not the same, he said finally. It is the same, I replied. You just don't like how it feels when you imagine it from the other side? He exhaled sharply, like he was running out of patience. This isn't productive, he said. We're going in circles. No, I said. We're not. You're just refusing to see it from my perspective. And you're refusing to trust me, he shot back. That landed harder than I expected. I did trust you, I said, my voice quieter now. That's why this hurts so much. The room went quiet again. I'm not asking you to never speak to her again, I continued. I'm asking you to recognize that what's happening isn't appropriate in the context of a marriage. I disagree, he said. Just like that. Calm. Final. That was the moment something shifted again. Because up until then, I think I was still hoping he would get it if I explained it the right way. That there was some version of this conversation where he would suddenly understand, apologize, and change. But hearing him say that so clearly, I disagree, made me realize we weren't just arguing about behavior. We were arguing about values. So what happens now? I asked. He looked at me, and for the first time, he seemed uncertain. I don't know, he admitted. I nodded. Neither do I. We didn't resolve anything that night. But over the next few days, things became clearer in a way I didn't expect, not because of anything dramatic he did, but because of what he didn't do. He didn't stop talking to her. Not completely, I could tell. The phone was still there, still active, still part of his attention in a way that it hadn't been before all of this started. He was more careful now, less obvious, less late, night calling when I was around, but it didn't feel like a real change. It felt like an adjustment, like he was trying to manage both situations instead of choosing, and that somehow hurt more than if he had just openly refused, because it meant he understood there was a problem, but not enough to fully address it. One evening, about 4 days after our big conversation, I came home earlier than usual. He was in the living room, laughing softly at something on his phone. He didn't hear me come in, and I just stood there for a moment, watching, not in a jealous, dramatic way, just observing. That lightness in his expression, that ease, I couldn't remember the last time I had seen him look at me like that. He noticed me a second later and immediately straightened up. "Hey," he said, "you're home early."
Yeah, I replied.
He put his phone down, but it felt too late. Something in me just settled, not in a painful way, not even an angry way, just a quiet realization. I don't think I'm the person he turns to anymore. And once that thought fully formed, everything else started to make sense. That night, I didn't bring it up again. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just went through the motions, dinner, a bit of small talk, getting ready for bed. But inside, something had already made a decision. The next morning, I told him, "I think we need to separate for a while." He looked surprised, like this wasn't the direction he expected things to go. "Because of this?" he asked. "Because of everything this represents," I said. He sat down, running a hand over his face. "So what, you're just giving up?" he said. I shook my head. "No, I'm stepping back from something that doesn't feel like a partnership anymore." "That's not fair," he said. "You're making a huge decision based on what I feel," I interrupted. "Which is valid, even if you don't agree with it." He didn't argue as much as I thought he would. Maybe because part of him saw it coming. Maybe because part of him wasn't as invested in fixing this as I had been. "I don't want to lose you," he said, and I believe that. "But I also understand something now that I didn't before. Not wanting to lose someone isn't the same as actively choosing them." "I don't want to lose us either," I said. "But I also don't want to feel like I'm competing for my husband's attention." We didn't set clear rules or timelines, just space. "I'm staying with my sister Emily for now. It's been a little over a week." He still texts me? Not constantly, but enough to remind me that the connection isn't completely gone. But I've noticed something else too. He hasn't once said he'll stop talking to Clara, not directly. And I think that tells me everything I need to know. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if this is temporary or the beginning of the end. But for the first time since this started, I feel like I'm not stuck in that same loop of questioning myself. I said what I needed to say. I drew a line. And now I'm seeing what he does with it. Final update. I think I knew how this would end long before I was ready to admit it. Not in a dramatic, clear-cut way, but in that quiet, persistent feeling that something fundamental had already shifted, and no amount of talking was going to bring it back to what it used to be. After I moved in with my sister Amelie, the distance between Daniel and me became real in a way it hadn't been before. When you're still living together, even in tension, there's this illusion that things are still connected, that you're still part of the same daily rhythm. Once that's gone, everything becomes much clearer. At first, he made an effort. He texted me every day, asked how I was, what I was doing, if I needed anything. He even suggested we go to counseling together. "I don't want this to end over something like this," he wrote. And that line stuck with me. Something like this. Even then, after everything we had talked about, everything I had explained, he still saw it as something small, something manageable, something that shouldn't be enough to break a marriage. I didn't respond to the counseling suggestion right away. Not because I was against it, but because I needed to understand something first. So I asked him a very simple question. "Are you still talking to her?" He replied about 10 minutes later. "Yes, but not like before. It's less. Not stopped, not ended, just reduced." I stared at that message for a long time, and I felt that same quiet clarity settle in again. Because if the situation were reversed, if I had been the one causing this kind of strain, I know exactly what I would have done. Not because someone forced me to, but because I would have wanted to protect my relationship. And he didn't? Not fully. I agreed to meet him a few days later, partly to talk about counseling, partly because I felt like we needed one final honest conversation without the distractions of our apartment or the weight of daily routine. We met in a park this time, not a cafe. It felt more open, less confined, like we both needed space even while talking. He looked relieved to see me, which made this harder than I expected. We walked for a bit before sitting down on a bench. "I miss you," he said almost immediately. I nodded. I miss you too. And I meant that. Missing someone doesn't disappear just because things are complicated. I think we can fix this, he continued, if we both try. I took a breath. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest, I said. Okay, if I hadn't said anything, if I hadn't pushed, argued, given you that ultimatum, would anything have changed? He didn't answer right away. That pause again, that hesitation that had become so familiar. I don't know, he admitted finally. And that was it. That was the moment everything locked into place. Because I realized I wasn't fighting against a misunderstanding or a temporary mistake. I was fighting against something he didn't see as a problem unless I forced him to. I don't think I want to keep trying, I said quietly. He looked at me, genuinely confused. What do you mean? We haven't even really tried yet. That's the point, I said. I feel like I'm the only one who has been trying this whole time. That's not fair, he said, a bit sharper now. I'm here, aren't I? I'm talking to you, I suggested counseling. But you're still talking to her, I said. He exhaled, clearly frustrated. It's not like before. But it's still something, I replied. And you're choosing to keep that something even now. It's not about choosing her over you, he said. It's about not wanting to cut someone off completely for no reason. I looked at him for a long moment. No reason? I repeated. That's not what I meant. But that's how it sounds, I said. After everything I've told you, everything I've felt, it still doesn't register as a valid reason to you. He went quiet again, and I realized then that we were speaking two completely different emotional languages. For me, boundaries were about protecting the relationship. For him, they seemed optional, negotiable, dependent on whether he personally agreed with them. I don't think this is going to work, I said. This time when I said it, it didn't feel heavy or uncertain. It just felt true. He shook his head slightly. You're ending a 10-year relationship over this, he said. I shook my head back. No, I said. I'm ending it because of what this has shown me about us. About me, you mean, he said. Yes, I replied, but also about me. That caught him off guard. What does that mean? It means I stayed in a situation that made me uncomfortable for too long, I said. I kept trying to explain, to justify, to make it make sense, instead of listening to what I was actually feeling. And now, he asked. Now I'm listening, I said. There was a long silence after that. I never cheated on you, he said quietly. I know, I replied. But it feels like you're treating me like I did. I thought about that for a moment. No, I said. I'm treating this like something that mattered enough to change how I see the relationship. He looked down at his hands. I didn't think it would come to this, he said. I know, I replied again. We sat there for a while longer, but the conversation didn't really continue. There wasn't anything left to argue about or convince each other of. We had reached the point where understanding each other wasn't enough to fix the difference between us. When we stood up to leave, it felt quiet. Not dramatic, not explosive, just final. He hugged me, and this time I hugged him back properly. Not because I was changing my mind, but because I wanted to acknowledge what we had been, not just how it ended. I'm sorry, he said. Me too, I replied. And that was it. No promises. No, we'll stay friends. Just an ending. It's been about a month now. I've moved into a small flat on my own. It's not perfect, but it's peaceful. There's no tension, no second guessing, no feeling like I'm competing for attention in my own relationship. Daniel and I haven't spoken since that day. I don't know what he's doing, and I've made a conscious decision not to find out. Not out of anger, but because I don't need to anymore. That's probably the biggest change. For a long time, I needed him to understand me in order to feel validated. I needed him to agree that what I was feeling was reasonable. Now, I don't. I understand myself, and that's enough. I don't regret the ultimatum anymore, even though I questioned it so much at the beginning, because it wasn't really about forcing a choice. It was about revealing one. And in the end, he made his, not by what he said, but by what he wasn't willing to let go of. And I made mine too. Stories number 12. I wasn't honest with myself about why I prefer older women. I've always told people I just happen to connect better with older women. That's been my line for years. It sounds harmless, even a little flattering depending on who hears it, like I'm mature for my age, like I value depth and stability over immaturity. People usually nod and accept it without digging any deeper. The truth is, I didn't even question it myself for a long time. I'm 28, living in Munich, and if I look back at my dating history, there's a very clear pattern. Every serious relationship I've had has been with someone at least 12 years older than me. Not a coincidence, not random. My first real relationship was when I was 20. Her name was Clara. She was 32, and at the time it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She was confident, calm, knew what she wanted, had her life together in a way that I didn't. I remember thinking I felt safe with her. That word comes up a lot when I think about it now, safe. At the time, I framed it differently. I told myself I liked that she was more experienced, more grounded, less into games. And all of that was true in a surface level way. But it wasn't the whole truth. After Clara, there was Sophia, then Marin, then Elise, not the same Elise from some other story, just coincidence. All of them older, all of them, in different ways similar. Independent, emotionally steady, a little guarded at first, but warm once you got past that. And me. I was always the one who adapted. I didn't see it like that back then. I thought I was just easygoing. But looking back, I can see a pattern where I would mold myself into whatever version of a partner fit best into their already established lives. They had routines, careers, habits, expectations, and I would slide into that space without questioning it. It worked for a while, but none of those relationships lasted. Not because of huge fights or betrayals. They all ended in this quiet, almost predictable way. At some point, they would start pulling away. Not dramatically, just less engaged, less invested, and eventually there would be a conversation. It was never exactly the same, but the core message was always similar. You're great, but something feels off. I don't feel like we're equals. I feel like I'm leading everything. At the time, I didn't really understand it. I'd leave those conversations feeling confused, a little hurt, but mostly convinced that they just wanted something different. I never connected it to myself in a deeper way. Then about a year ago, I met Lena. She's 39. We met through mutual friends at a small gathering, nothing special. But the connection was immediate. Same pattern as always. She was composed, confident, slightly distant at first, but with this quiet warmth underneath. We started seeing each other casually, which turned into something more serious pretty quickly. And for the first few months, it felt like everything I'd always told myself. Easy, stable, no games. But Lena was different in one important way. She paid attention. Not in a suspicious or controlling way, but in a way that made it hard to just exist on autopilot. She'd ask questions that weren't surface level. Not just how was your day, but why did that bother you? Or what do you actually want here? At first, I thought it was just emotional maturity, which it was. But it also meant I couldn't hide behind my usual patterns as easily. About 4 months into the relationship, we had a conversation that changed everything for me. We were at her apartment, sitting on the couch after dinner. It was quiet, nothing tense, just one of those calm evenings. Out of nowhere, she asked, "Why do you date older women?" I gave my usual answer. I said I connect better with them, that I prefer maturity, that it just feels more natural. She listened, nodded, and then said, "That's not a real answer." I remember feeling slightly defensive. Not angry, just exposed. I asked what she meant. She said, "That's the answer you give other people. I'm asking what it does for you." I didn't have anything to say to that. I tried to brush it off, make a joke, but she didn't push. She just let the question hang there, and for some reason, it stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before, the way I deferred to her on decisions. Small things like where to eat or what to do on weekends. I'd always say, "I'm fine with whatever you want." The way I avoided conflict. If something bothered me, I'd minimize it or just let it go instead of bringing it up. The way I felt this constant need to be agreeable. It wasn't conscious. It just felt easier. Then one night, we had our first real disagreement. It was something small, plans for a weekend trip. She wanted to go somewhere quiet. I wanted something more active. Normally, I would have just gone along with her preference without thinking about it. But for some reason, I didn't. I said I actually wanted something different. It wasn't even confrontational, just honest. And the reaction caught me off guard. She didn't get angry. She didn't shut it down. She just looked at me and said, "Okay." "Then why didn't you say that earlier?" I didn't have a good answer. Because the truth was, I hadn't even fully registered my own preference until that moment. That's when it started to click. It wasn't just about liking older women. It was about what being with them allowed me to avoid. A few days later, we had another conversation, and this time I brought it up myself. I told her I'd been thinking about what she said, that I didn't think my reasons were as simple as I'd always claimed. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. And I started talking, kind of figuring it out as I went. I told her that growing up, my home environment wasn't exactly stable. My father, Henrik, was very unpredictable. Not violent, but emotionally inconsistent. One day he'd be calm, the next he'd be distant or irritated over nothing. My mother, Ingrid, compensated by trying to keep everything smooth. No conflict, no tension. She'd adjust herself constantly to keep things from escalating. I think I learned from that. That it's easier to adapt than to assert. That peace is maintained by not pushing too hard. And when I started dating, I gravitated toward women who already had their lives structured, who didn't need me to lead or define anything. Because that meant I could just fit in. No pressure to take up space. No risk of creating conflict by wanting something different. And the older part wasn't really about age itself, it was about that dynamic. Lena was quiet for a while after I said all that. Then she said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. She said, "You don't prefer older women. You prefer not having to figure out who you are in a relationship." That hit harder than anything else. Because it felt true in a way that was uncomfortable. We didn't break up that night or anything dramatic like that. But something shifted. I became more aware of myself in the relationship, which sounds like a good thing, and it is, but it also made everything more complicated. because now I couldn't unsee the patterns. Every time I defaulted to whatever you want, I noticed it. Every time I avoided bringing something up, I felt it. And the dynamic between us started to change. Not because she was doing anything differently, but because I was. I started expressing preferences more. Small at first, then bigger. And instead of making things better immediately, it created tension. Not unhealthy tension, but friction. Because suddenly, I wasn't just fitting into her life. I was trying to build something shared, and that's harder. A couple of weeks ago, we had a conversation that felt like a turning point. She told me she didn't want to feel like she was guiding me through the relationship, that she wanted a partner, not someone who was still figuring out how to exist in it. I understood what she meant, but it also made me realize something else. For the first time, I wasn't entirely sure if I even knew how to be that kind of partner. Not because I don't want to be, but because I've never really practiced it. Every relationship I've had has followed the same structure. Me adapting, them leading, things working until they don't. This is the first time I've actually had to confront that, and it's uncomfortable. Part of me wonders if I've been unintentionally creating these dynamics all along and then feeling confused when they eventually collapse. Part of me wonders if I've been choosing partners who allow me to stay in that role. And part of me is honestly scared that if I don't figure this out, I'll just keep repeating the same pattern over and over. Lena and I are still together for now, but it feels different. Not worse, not better, just more real, less automatic. And I don't know where it's going to end up. All I know is that for the first time, I'm not able to hide behind the idea that this is just my preference. Because it's not. Or at least, not in the way I used to believe. And now I'm left trying to figure out who I actually am in a relationship when I'm not just quietly shaping myself around someone else. Update. I didn't expect things to get as uncomfortable as they did after I started actually trying to change my behavior. I think part of me assumed that awareness alone would fix something, that once I understood the pattern, I'd naturally just stop doing it. That's not how it worked. If anything, it made everything feel more exposed. For a while after that conversation with Lena, I was hyper aware of every interaction between us. It was like I'd lost the ability to just exist normally in the relationship. Every time she asked what I wanted to do, I'd freeze for a second too long, trying to figure out if my answer was genuine or just another version of me trying to keep things smooth. Even small decisions started to feel loaded. One night, she asked what I wanted for dinner, and I genuinely didn't know. Not because I didn't have preferences, but because I wasn't used to prioritizing them. My instinct was still to say whatever you feel like. I caught myself, paused, and then said, "I'm not sure. Give me a minute." She nodded, but I could see it on her face, this subtle shift. Not annoyance exactly, but awareness. Like she was watching me try to navigate something that should be simple. That became a pattern. Moments where I was trying to be more present, more intentional, but it came out as hesitation instead of clarity. And I think that started to wear on her. About 2 weeks after my last post, we had a conversation that felt heavier than anything before. We were sitting at her kitchen table late in the evening. No distractions, no background noise, just that kind of quiet that usually means something important is about to be said. She told me she was starting to feel unsure about us. Not in a dramatic, this isn't working way, but in a more subtle, complicated way. She said, "I can see that you're trying, and I respect that. But it also feels like you're learning how to be in a relationship while you're in one with me." That stung, even though I knew it wasn't meant to hurt. I asked her what she meant exactly, and she took a moment before answering. She said it feels like she's constantly aware of my process. That instead of just being with each other, there's this layer of analysis underneath everything I do. And she's right, there is. Because I'm constantly checking myself now, questioning whether something is coming from me or from old habits. She said she doesn't want to feel like she's part of some kind of self-discovery phase where the outcome is uncertain. That she's at a point in her life where she wants something stable, something solid, not something that might evolve into that eventually. I didn't know how to respond to that. Because on one hand, I understood completely. She's 39, she knows what she wants, and it's not unreasonable. On the other hand, I felt like I was being judged for something I didn't even fully realize about myself until recently. I told her that. I said, "I didn't know I was doing this. I'm trying to fix it, but I can't just switch it off overnight." She nodded and said she knows, that she's not expecting perfection. But then she said something that stayed with me. She said, "I just don't know if I'm the right person for you to figure this out with." That was the first time I felt like this might not just be difficult, it might not last. We didn't break up that night. But things shifted again. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet distancing. We still see each other, still talk, still spend time together. But there's a layer of caution now. Like we're both aware that we're standing on something that isn't entirely stable. At the same time, something unexpected has been happening with me. Outside of the relationship, I've started noticing the same patterns in other areas of my life. At work, for example, I've realized how often I default to agreeing with colleagues even when I have a different opinion. How I avoid pushing back, not because I don't care, but because it feels uncomfortable to create friction. With friends, too. Letting others decide plans, going along with things I'm not that interested in, just to keep everything easy. It's like this isn't just a relationship issue. It's how I've been operating in general. And now that I see it, I can't unsee it. A few days ago, something small happened that felt bigger than it should have. I was out with a couple of friends, Jonas and Felix. We were deciding where to go next, and as usual, they were throwing out options. Normally, I would have just gone with whatever they decided. But this time, I said, actually, I don't feel like going to a bar. I'd rather just grab food somewhere quiet. There was a brief pause, and then Jonas just said, yeah, that sounds good. That was it. No conflict. No tension. No negative reaction. And it hit me how much of my behavior has been based on the assumption that expressing a preference will create problems. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just gets accepted. That moment stayed with me more than I expected. Later that night, I told Lena about it. She smiled a little and said, see, the world doesn't collapse when you take up space. It was a small moment, but it felt like progress. At the same time, it doesn't erase the bigger question hanging over us. A couple of nights ago, we had another conversation. This time, it was more direct, and she asked me where I see this going. And for the first time, I didn't default to what I thought she wanted to hear. I said, honestly, I don't know yet. I want this to work, but I also know I'm still figuring things out. She appreciated the honesty, but I could tell it didn't reassure her. Because what she wants is certainty. And what I have right now is awareness, but not certainty. We talked for a long time that night. About expectations, about timing, about whether it's fair to continue something when we're not aligned in where we are emotionally. There was no conclusion, no decision. Just an understanding that something has to give at some point. I've started thinking about therapy, which is not something I've seriously considered before. But I feel like I'm at a point where I need help unpacking this properly instead of just trying to figure it out in my head. Because it's not just about who I date. It's about how I exist in relationships. In general, Lena is still here, for now. But I can feel that we're approaching some kind of turning point. Not because we don't care about each other, but because we might be in different places in terms of what we need right now. And I don't know if growth and stability can coexist in the way we both want them to. All I know is that I can't go back to not knowing. Even if this relationship doesn't last, I don't think I can ever return to that version of myself who just adapts without questioning it, which is probably a good thing in the long run. But right now, it just feels like I'm standing in the middle of something uncertain, trying to become someone I don't fully understand yet, while also trying not to lose something that matters to me in the process. Update. Lena and I broke up. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no betrayal, no single moment where everything exploded. If anything, that almost would have been easier to process. Instead, it happened in the same quiet, deliberate way everything between us had been unfolding for the past few months. We both saw it coming before either of us said it out loud. The conversation happened about 2 weeks after my last update. We were at her apartment again, sitting in the same place where so many of these talks had happened before. It felt familiar in a way that made what was about to happen even heavier. She started it. She said, I think we both know this isn't going to become what we want it to be. There was no accusation in her voice, no frustration, just clarity, and for once I didn't try to soften it or redirect it. I said, yeah, I think you're right. That was the first time in my life I've agreed to the end of a relationship without trying to negotiate it, fix it, or reshape myself to make it work, and that alone felt like something had changed in me. We talked for a long time after that. Not about staying together, but about why it wasn't working. She told me she cared about me, that she still does, but that being with me felt like being slightly out of sync all the time, like she was ready to stand still and build something stable while I was still in the process of figuring out how to stand on my own. And the thing is, I couldn't argue with that, because it's true. I told her that I didn't think I'd ever had a relationship where I showed up as a fully formed version of myself, that I've always been some variation of adapting, adjusting, fitting into a space that already existed. She said, and now you're trying not to do that, but you don't fully know what replaces it yet. That's probably the most accurate way anyone's described it. We didn't frame it as failure. At least we tried not to. She said something that stuck with me. This relationship did what it needed to do. It just wasn't meant to last beyond that. I don't know if I completely believe that yet, but I understand what she meant. We ended things that night. No let's stay friends promises, no vague plans to reconnect later. Just an honest acknowledgement that continuing would only stretch something that wasn't aligned anymore. Leaving her apartment that night felt different from every breakup I've had before. There was sadness, obviously. A quiet kind of grief that didn't hit all at once but sat in the background. But there was also something else, a kind of clarity. Not relief exactly, but the absence of that constant internal tension I'd been feeling, like I was trying to grow and maintain something stable at the same time, and failing at both. The first few days after were strange. I kept expecting to fall back into old patterns, overthinking what I could have done differently, replaying conversations, wondering if I should have just been easier, more agreeable, less complicated. But I didn't. Not in the same way. Those thoughts came up, but they didn't take over. Because for the first time, I could see exactly what that would mean. It would mean going back to that version of myself who disappears into the relationship, and I don't think I can do that anymore. About a week after the breakup, I started therapy. Even just writing that feels like a bigger step than I expected it to be. Her name is Katharina. She's in her early 50s, very calm, very direct in a way that doesn't feel intrusive. In the first session, she asked me why I decided to come in now, and I told her something I hadn't fully put into words before. I said, because I don't know who I am when I'm not adapting to someone else. Saying that out loud felt uncomfortable, but also honest in a way I haven't been with myself before. We've only had a few sessions so far, but it's already made me realize how deep this pattern goes. It's not just about relationships, it's about how I learn to navigate the world, avoid conflict, stay agreeable, adjust to maintain stability, and that worked in a way. It got me through a lot. But it also meant I never really developed a strong sense of my own preferences, boundaries, or even identity in certain situations. I've started doing small things differently. Nothing dramatic, just noticing and then choosing. Like when someone asks what I want, I actually take a moment to think instead of defaulting to anything is fine. Or when something bothers me, I try to say it even if it feels uncomfortable. Some days it feels natural. Other days it feels like I'm forcing something that doesn't quite fit yet. But I guess that's part of the process. I haven't dated anyone since Lena, not because I've made some strict rule, but because I don't feel the urge to jump back into anything. For the first time, I'm not looking for someone to step into. I'm trying to figure out what it feels like to just exist on my own terms first. I've also noticed something interesting. When I think about the idea of dating again in the future, the older women preference doesn't feel as fixed as it used to. Not because I suddenly want something completely different, but because I can see now that it wasn't really about age. It was about the role I got to play. And if I'm not playing that role anymore, then maybe my preferences will shift too. Or maybe they won't. But at least now, whatever I choose will come from a more honest place. I still think about Lena sometimes, not in a regretful way, but in an appreciative way, I guess. She saw something in me that I had been avoiding for years, and instead of ignoring it, she pointed directly at it. That's not easy to do, and it's not always comfortable to receive, but I don't think I would have reached this point without that. If there's one thing I've taken from all of this, it's that understanding yourself isn't some clean, linear process. It's messy. It disrupts things that felt stable. It forces you to question parts of yourself that you thought were just the way you are. And sometimes, it costs you relationships that might have worked if you had stayed the same. But I also think that staying the same would have cost me something bigger in the long run. Right now, my life feels quieter, less defined in some ways, but also more open. I don't have a clear answer yet for who I am in a relationship, but at least now, I'm not hiding from the question. And for the first time, that feels like a better place to start than any answer I used to give.